Welcome everyone to the last gasp of the Russia collusion conspiracy theory.
Buenas tardes, ya. Buenas tardes.
You, Mr. Mueller.
Espérate, está mal puesta la cámara.
You may recall, the media first began spreading this conspiracy theory in the spring of 2016. Infusion GPS funded
¿Cómo que está mal puesta?
the Hillary Clinton campaign started developing the Steele dossier. A collection of
¿Está sin audio?
accusations that Trump and his associates
Ya.
were Russian agents. Fusion GPS, Steele, and other Confederates fed these absurdities to naive or partisan reporters and to top officials in numerous government agencies, including the FBI,
¿Cómo está bueno el setup, mijo?
Justice,
¿Ah?
¿Está bueno el setup?
State Department.
Sí, está bueno. Ya.
Among other things, the FBI
Muy
used
buenas tardes.
dossier
Estamos
allegations
comenzando
to
ahora con la
obtain a
segunda
warrant
patita.
to spy on the Trump campaign.
Esto es la
Despite acknowledging dossier
Edición
allegations,
especial de Liberales en las Rocas.
el testimonio de Robert Mueller ahora ante la Comisión de Inteligencia. Antes hablamos sobre los cargos de obstrucción a la justicia. Ahora vamos a estar hablando sobre los cargos de interferencia rusa.
resulting in the publication of the
Y es
dossier
distinto.
and
¿ah?
launching
Y aquí hay varios protagonistas más notables. David Nunes, que es el republicano que está hablando ahora, es una persona despreciable.
Un esbirro del cabeza pichí, esencialmente.
and who was eventually fired.
Ojo que la parte de esta audiencia tiene que ver con Rusia, pero no directamente con el primer volumen del reporte, el informe de Mueller, que era sobre el ataque cibernético y comunicacional al proceso democrático gringo, sino que tiene que ver con la investigación contra la inteligencia, respecto a Trump y su campaña. Léase, por ejemplo, tiene Vlad Putin palanca respecto a Trump. Lo puede apretar con alguna cosa para hacer lo que él quiere. Acordémonos de la conferencia de prensa infame de Trump con Vladimir Putin en Helsinki, en que it's a very strong denial, very powerful, de Vladimir Putin, de la interferencia, y Putin le regaló una pelota de fútbol a Donald Trump. Y Adidas, en un comunicado, que en la pelota Adidas del Mundial, y de hecho tenía un chip la pelota, para seguir, la alternativa del partido en las transmisiones de fútbol. Y le preguntaron a Adidas si se podía usar la misma tecnología para espiar. Y Adidas declinó comentar si se puede usar el chip aquí con la pelota de fútbol.
Mr. Mueller was soon appointed, and they said he would find the collusion. Then when no collusion was found in Mr. Mueller's indictments, the Democrats said we'd find it in his final report. Then when there was no collusion in the report, we were told Attorney General Barr was hiding it. Then when it was clear Barr wasn't hiding anything, we were told it will be revealed through a hearing with Mr. Mueller himself. And now that Mr. Mueller is here, they are claiming that the collusion has actually been in his report all along.
¿Tiene acento? Acompáñanos.
Plain sight.
¿Tiene
Sí,
acento?
sí, es drújula.
There is collusion in plain sight. Collusion between Russia and the Democratic Party. The Democrats colluded with Russian sources to dossier.
En este momento Trump que está... No. En este momento Trump que está viendo esta weá en su pieza, weón, o en el baño, mientras está sentado. Weón dice, sí, ahí sí, esto es...
Sí, en este momento Trump está efectivamente sentado en el water closet, en el retrete, tuiteando.
En el water closet.
¿Quieres una pastillita de menta?
Ya, gracias.
O sea, miel menta.
Ah, entonces no.
In other words,
Ah, a lo mejor no te
this
gusta,
hearing
pero
is
sí,
a
yo.
theater. It's a Hail Mary attempt to convince the American people that collusion is
Fíjense
real.
la cara con que Mueller mira todas las cabezas de pescado que dice Nunes.
Granted, that's a strange argument to make about a report that is public. It's almost like the Democrats prepared arguments accusing Mr. Barr of hiding the report and didn't bother to update their claims once he published the entire
Eso
thing.
hizo, po.
Among congressional Democrats, the Russia investigation was never about finding the truth. It's always been a simple media operation. By their own accounts, this operation continues in this room today. Once again, numerous pressing issues this committee needs to address are put on hold to indulge the political fantasies of people who believed it was their
Oh,
Se me fue.
no me falles, no me falles, Hispan.
No, pero esto fue porque cuando lleva mucho rato solo, como que la página te dice, este weón ya no está viendo, ¿cachai? Cuando no es ni un clic. Y sí, bueno, fui a almorzar y esta weá siguió corriendo, así que ya, está.
Oye, pero ahora están...
Es como si hubiera partido recién la weá. Sí, pues nada que ver.
No,
A ver, sí, voy ya. Voy a actualizarlo bien.
no, House, Intelligence, eso.
House of Justice,
Sí,
toda
eso.
razón.
Eso.
Ya.
École, weá.
En segundos va a estar esto. Empezar play. Y vamos allá. Ahí estamos.
After 6 members of the majority and 6 members of
Ahora
the
van a
minority
comenzar.
have concluded their 5-minute rounds of questions, we'll take a 5 or 10
Yo
minute break.
quiero contar
that
que
we
este
understand
señor
you
Schiff, yo lo he
requested
visto en varias
before
entrevistas,
resuming the hearing
y es como
with
el
Congressman
Mr. Spock
Swalwell starting
del
his round of
Congreso.
questions. Special Counsel Mueller is accompanied
Parece un
today
buen
by
tipo,
Aaron Zebley,
pero
who served as
interesante,
Deputy
y tiene
Special
emociones,
Counsel
pero está
from May
absolutamente
2017
desconectado de ella,
until May
algo que
2019,
acaso
and
tengo
had
algo en
day-to-day
común, o sea,
oversight
puedo
of the Special Counsel's
empatizar con él.
investigation.
Entonces
Mr.
Trump
Mueller
le
and
dice
Mr.
las cosas
Zebley
más terribles por
resigned from the
Twitter
Department of Justice
y él
at
le
the
contesta
end
en
of
forma muy
May
cortés.
2019 when the Special
Impresionante.
Counsel's office was
Es
closed.
como Obama, pero en esteroide en el
Both
sentido de
Mr. Mueller and
desconexión.
Mr. Zebley will be available to answer questions today.
Es como el chico, el gran Ricardo Soto, el arquero chileno, arco y flecha, que fue a Río, a los Juegos de Río, a los Juegos de Río de Janeiro. Entonces llegó así como a semifinales y perdió por una flecha con el número 2 del mundo. Y lo entrevistaron. Le preguntaron, oye Ricardo, te están viendo en Iquique, tus compañeros del colegio, están todos en el gimnasio reunidos viendo la tele gigante. Qué bueno, un saludo para ellos. ¿Y cómo estás con tu actuación? ¿Estás contento? Sí, bueno, estoy satisfecho. Creo que partí mal. Y completamente desconectado de las emociones. Entonces uno se pregunta, claro, para ser un buen arquero hay que estar como bien operado de los nervios. Acaba de ser jurado sworn in, como se dice en inglés. Robert
Thank you,
Mueller.
Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify that this is highly unusual for Mr. Zelby to be sworn in. We're here to
En
ask Director
esta
Mueller
cuestión
questions.
va
He's here
a
as
ser
counsel.
sworn in el ayudante de
Our
Mueller.
side's not going to be
Que ayer fue
directing any
noticia que
questions
Mueller
to
había
Mr.
pedido,
Zebley.
solicitado al líder de esta comisión, yo pensé que era de la otra, de esta comisión, que jure también, no solamente él, sino que también su segundo a bordo en la investigación.
So I just want to voice that
Y eso
concern
para los republicanos les complica.
We will not be addressing any questions to Mr.
Y la razón por la cual va a hacer esto, no la sé.
Member,
Así que quizás que pase
I
ahora.
realize, as you probably do, Mr. Zebley, that there is a angry man down the street who's not happy about your being here today. But it is up to this committee and not us who will be allowed to be sworn in and testify. And you are welcome as a private citizen to testify, and members may direct their questions to whoever they choose. With that, Director Mueller, you are
Eso es el
recognized for any
estilo de
opening
Adam Schiff.
remarks you'd like to make.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chairman Schiff, Ranking Member Nunes, and members of the committee. I testified this morning before the House Judiciary Committee. I ask that the opening statement I made before that committee be incorporated into the record here.
Without objection, Director.
I understand that this committee has a unique jurisdiction and that you are interested in further understanding the counterintelligence implications of our investigation. So let me say a word about how we handled the potential impact of our investigation
Atención con esto.
on counterintelligence matters. As we explained in our report, the Special Counsel regulations effectively gave me the role of United States Attorney. As a result, we structured our investigation around evidence for possible use in prosecution of federal crimes. We did not reach what you would call counterintelligence conclusions. We did, however, set up processes in the office to identify and pass counterintelligence information onto the FBI. Members of our office periodically brief the FBI about counterintelligence information. In addition, there were agents and analysts from the FBI who were not on our team, but whose job it was to identify counterintelligence information in our files and to disseminate that information to the FBI. For these reasons, questions about what the FBI has done with the counterintelligence information obtained from our investigation should be directed to the FBI. I also want to reiterate a few points that I made this morning. I am not making any judgments or offering opinions about the guilt or innocence in any pending case. It is unusual for a prosecutor to testify about a criminal investigation, and given my role as a prosecutor, there are reasons why my testimony will necessarily be limited. First, public testimony could affect several ongoing matters. In some of these matters, court rules or judicial orders limit the disclosure of information to protect the fairness of the proceedings. And consistent with longstanding Justice Department policy, it would be inappropriate for me to comment in any way that could affect an ongoing matter. Second, the Justice Department has asserted privileges concerning investigative information and decisions, ongoing matters within the Justice Department, and deliberations within our office. These are Justice Department privileges that I will respect. The Department has released a letter discussing the restrictions on my
Menos mal que no dijiste
testimony.
espacio vital.
I therefore will not be able to answer questions about certain areas that I know are of public interest. For example, I am unable to address questions about the opening of the FBI's Russia investigation, which occurred months before my appointment, or matters related to the so-called Steele
Aquí
dossier.
Bob Mueller está
These matters are
dando
the subject of
cuáles son las
ongoing review
canchas
by the
de las
department.
cosas que él puede y no puede hablar. Acá va a ser, si bien en el testimonio anterior fue súper restringido con respecto a qué cosas habló y qué cosas dijo, acá va a ser aún más restringido porque esto tiene muchos elementos de inteligencia y hay muchos más elementos todavía que están aún abiertos en otras investigaciones. Entonces es complejo. Pero, si no me equivoco,
Lo que te dije de
claro,
We stated the
por favor.
results of our investigation with precision.
Mueller podría hablar de ciertos temas, dado que este comité de la Constitución le confía información clasificada.
No, pero esto es una cosa abierta.
Claro, pero Mueller puede decir, puedo referirme a esto, pero en sesión
En
cerrada.
sesión cerrada, claro. Pero creo que no está invitado a sesión cerrada. Solamente yo pensé que esta sesión iba a ser cerrada. Pero si es abierto, entonces claro, él tiene mucha restricción con respecto a qué cosas decir. Si fuera cerrada, podría decir cosas que son confidenciales.
No son excluyentes necesariamente, capaz que puede que lo citen.
Sí. No, pero se supone que el informe sobre esta cosa rusa, ese no se entregó públicamente, ¿no es cierto? No.
Chief, el que ahora dirige este comité, dice que a partir de hace más de un año y medio, no saben nada de la investigación.
By Mr. Liu, who said, and I quote, "You didn't charge the president because of the OLC opinion. That is not the correct way to say it. As we say in the report, and as I said at the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime." And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I recognize myself for 5 minutes.
Eso, más noticia para los demócratas.
Dr. Mueller, your
Muy
report
malo.
describes a sweeping and systematic effort by Russia to influence our presidential election. Is
Y le
that
pasa
correct?
aún más la pelota a
And
el
during the
Congreso.
course of this Russian interference in the election, the Russians made outreach to the Trump campaign, did they not?
That occurred over the course of, that occurred.
It's also clear from your report that during that Russian outreach to the Trump campaign, no one associated with the Trump campaign ever called the FBI to report it. Am I right?
Don't know that for sure.
In fact, the campaign welcomed the Russian help, did they not?
I think we report in the report indications that occurred, yes.
The The president's
Sí, hola.
son said when he was approached about dirt on Hillary Clinton that the Trump campaign would love it.
That is generally what was said, yes.
The president himself called on the Russians to hack Hillary's emails.
There was a statement by the president in those general lines.
And numerous times during the campaign, the president praised the releases of the Russian-hacked emails through WikiLeaks.
That did occur.
Your report found that the Trump campaign planned, quote, a press strategy, communications campaign, and messaging, unquote, based on that Russian assistance.
I am not familiar with that.
That language comes from Volume 1, page 54. Apart from the Russians wanting to help Trump win, several individuals associated with the Trump campaign were also trying to make money during the campaign and transition. Is that correct?
That is true.
Paul Manafort was trying to make money or achieve debt forgiveness from a Russian oligarch.
Generally, that is accurate.
Michael Flynn was trying to make money from Turkey.
True.
Donald Trump was trying to make millions from a real estate deal in Moscow.
To the extent you're talking about the hotel in Moscow,
Yes.
yes.
When your investigation looked into these matters, numerous Trump associates lied to your team, the grand jury, and Congress.
Number of persons that we interviewed in
Me confundo entre los hoteles de
our
Moscú de Trump.
investigation, it turns out, did lie.
Mike Flynn lied.
He was convicted of lying, yes.
George Papadopoulos was convicted of lying.
True,
Paul Manafort was convicted of lying.
true.
Paul Manafort was, in fact, went so far as to encourage other people to lie.
That is accurate.
Manafort's deputy, Rick Gates, lied.
That is accurate.
Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, was indicted for lying.
True.
He lied to stay on message with the president.
Allegedly by him.
And when Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a
Director?
witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
When he said it publicly, it was false?
He did say publicly that it was false, yes.
And when he told it to Putin, that was false too, wasn't it?
That I'm not familiar with.
When the president said he had no business dealings with
¿Tiene más energía en
Russia,
esta?
that was false, wasn't it?
I'm not going to go into the details of the report that along those lines.
But when the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, in fact, he was seeking to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, is he not?
I think there is some question about when this was accomplished.
Well, you would consider a billion-dollar deal to build a tower in Moscow to be business dealings, wouldn't you, Director Mueller?
Yeah, absolutely.
In short, your investigation found evidence that Russia wanted to help Trump win the election, right?
I think generally that would be accurate.
Russia informed campaign officials of that?
I'm not certain to what conversations you're referring to.
Well, through an intermediary, they informed Papadopoulos that they could help with the anonymous release of stolen emails?
Accurate.
Russia committed federal crimes in order to help Donald Trump?
When you're talking about the computer crimes in the charge in our case, absolutely.
The Trump campaign officials built their strategy, their messaging strategy around those stolen documents?
Generally, that's true.
And then they lied to cover it up.
Generally, that's true.
Thank you, Mr. Nunes.
Thank you. Welcome.
Ahora viene, bueno, Chief es bueno, es duro.
As a former
Y
FBI
ahora viene
director,
Nunes, que
you'd
es
agree
una
that the
bestia.
FBI is the world's most capable law enforcement agency.
I would say yes.
The FBI claims the counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign began on July 31st, 2016. But in fact, it began before that. In June 2016, before the investigation officially opened, Trump campaign associates Carter Page and Stephen Miller, a current Trump advisor, were invited to attend a symposium at Cambridge University in July 2016. Your office, however, did not investigate who was responsible for inviting these Trump associates to this symposium. Your investigators also failed to interview Stephen Schrage, an American citizen who helped organize the event and invited Carter Page to it. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Whether or not you interviewed Stephen Schrage, who organized the Cambridge.
In those areas, I am going to stay away from.
The first Trump associate to be investigated was General Flynn. Many of the allegations against him stem from false media reports that he had an affair with a Cambridge academic, Svetlana Lokova, and that Lokova was a Russian spy. Some of these allegations were made public in a 2017 article written by British intelligence historian Christopher Andrew. Your report fails to reveal how or why Andrew and his collaborator, Richard Dearlove, former head of Britain's MI6, spread these allegations. And you failed to interview Svetlana Lokova about these matters. Is that correct?
I'm not going to get into those matters to which you refer.
You had a team of 19 lawyers, 40 agents, and an unlimited budget, correct, Mr. Mueller?
I would not say we had an unlimited budget.
Let's continue with the opening of the investigation, supposedly on July 31st, 2016. The investigation was not opened based on an official product from Five Eyes Intelligence, but based on a rumor conveyed by Alexander Downer. On volume 1, page 89, your report describes him blandly as a representative of a foreign government. But he was actually a longtime Australian politician, not a military or intelligence official, who had previously arranged a $25 million donation to the Clinton Foundation and has previous ties to Dearlove. So Downer conveys a rumor he supposedly heard about a conversation between Papadopoulos and Joseph Mifsud. James Comey has publicly called Mifsud a Russian agent. Yet your report does not refer to Mifsud as a Russian agent. Mifsud has extensive contacts with Western governments and the FBI. For example, there is a recent photo of him standing next to Boris Johnson, the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. What we're trying to figure out here, Mr. Mueller, is if our NATO allies or Boris Johnson have been compromised. So we're trying to figure out, Comey says Mifsud is a Russian agent, you do not. So do you stand by what's in the report?
I stand by that which is in the report and not so necessarily with that which is not in the report.
I want to return to Mr. Downer. He denies that Papadopoulos mentioned anything to him about Hillary Clinton's emails. And in fact, Mifsud denies mentioning to them that to Papadopoulos. He denies that Papadopoulos mentioned anything to him about Hillary Clinton's emails. And in fact, Mifsud denies mentioning them to Papadopoulos in the first place. So how does the FBI know to continually ask Papadopoulos about Clinton's emails for the rest of 2016? Even more strangely, your sentencing memo on Papadopoulos blames him for hindering the FBI's ability to potentially detain or arrest Mifsud. But the truth is, Mifsud waltzed in and out of the United States in December 2016. The US media could find him, the Italian press found him, and he's a supposed Russian agent at the epicenter of the purported collusion conspiracy. He's the guy who knows about Hillary Clinton's emails and that the Russians have them. But the FBI failed to question him for a half a year after officially opening the investigation. And then according to volume 1, page 193 of your report, once Mifsud finally was questioned, he made false statements to the FBI. But you declined to charge him. Is that correct? You did not indict Mr. Mifsud?
I'm not going to speak to the series of happenings as you articulated them.
But you did not indict Mr. Mifsud.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Pardon?
You did not indict Mr. Mifsud.
True.
Mr. Himes.
Director Mueller, thank you for your lifetime of service to this country, and thank you for your perseverance and patience today. Director, your report opens with two statements of remarkable clarity and power. The first statement is one that is, as of today, not acknowledged by the President of the United States, and that is, quote, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. The second statement remains controversial amongst members of this body. Same page on your report, and I quote, the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome. Do I have that statement right?
I believe so.
Director Mueller, this attack on our democracy involved, as you said, two operations. First, a social media disinformation campaign. This was a targeted campaign to spread false information on places like Twitter and Facebook. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Facebook estimated, as per your report, that the Russian fake images reached 126 million people. Is that correct?
I believe that's the sum that we record.
Director, who did the
Se calcula, de hecho, en las últimas
Russian
elecciones
social media
europeas, las
campaign
imágenes
ultimately intend to
de
benefit?
páginas Facebook
Hillary
destinadas a,
Clinton or Donald
a
Trump?
mover
Donald
cosas
Trump.
falsas para el resultado electoral
The
llegaron a
second
500 millones de
operation,
personas.
Let me
Director,
just say
500.
Donald Trump, but there were instances where
Suave.
Hillary Clinton was subject to much the same behavior.
the second operation in the Russian attack was a scheme, what we call the hack and dump, to steal and release hundreds of thousands of emails from the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign. Is that a fair summary?
That is.
Did your investigation find that the releases of the hacked emails were strategically timed to maximize impact on the election?
I'd have to refer you to our report on that question.
Page 36, I quote, the release of the documents was designed and timed to interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Mr. Mueller, which presidential candidate was Russia's hacking and dumping operation designed to benefit, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Mr. Trump.
Mr. Mueller, is it possible that this sweeping and systematic effort by Russia actually had an effect on the outcome of the presidential election?
Those issues are being or have been investigated by other entities.
126 million Facebook impressions, fake rallies, attacks on Hillary Clinton's health. Would you rule out that it might have had some effect on the election?
I'm not going to speculate.
Mr. Mueller, your report describes a third avenue of attempted Russian interference. That is, the numerous links and contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals tied to the Russian government. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question?
Your report describes what is called a third avenue of Russian interference, and that's the links and contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals tied to the Russian government.
Yes.
Let's bring up slide 1, which is about George Papadopoulos, and it reads, on May 6, 2016, 10 days after that meeting with Mifsud, much discussed today, Papadopoulos suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. And Director, that's exactly what happened 2 months later, is it not?
Well, I can speak to the excerpt that you have on the screen as being accurate from the report, but not the second half of your question.
Well, the second half, just to refer to page 6 of the report, is that on July 22nd, through WikiLeaks, thousands of these emails that were stolen by the Russian government appeared, correct? That's on page 6 of the report. This is the WikiLeaks posting of those emails.
I can't find it quickly, but please continue.
Okay. So just to be clear, before the public or the FBI ever knew, the Russians previewed for a Trump campaign official, George Papadopoulos, that they had stolen emails that they could release anonymously to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. Is that correct?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Director, rather than report this contact with Joseph Mifsud and the notion that there was dirt that the campaign could use, rather than report that to the FBI, that I think most of my constituents would expect an individual to do, Papadopoulos, in fact, lied about his Russian contacts to you.
Nuevamente va a
Is
hablar
that
un
not
rato
correct?
más Eric Swalwell, que fue ex candidato presidencial norteamericano, y va a hablar Joaquín
We have an
Castro,
election
que es
coming up in
un actual
2020,
candidato presidencial
Director.
norteamericano.
If a campaign receives an
Es
offer of dirt
un-
from a foreign individual or a government,
congresista en esta
generally
comisión,
speaking, should that
Y
campaign
tuvo
report
un gran
those
resultado
contacts?
en el
Should be.
primero de los
It
dos
can be,
debates
depending on the circumstances of crime.
demócratas de hace cerca de un mes.
I will yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Conaway.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller, did anyone ask you to exclude anything from your report that you felt should have been in the report?
I don't think so, but it's not a small report.
But no one asked you specifically to exclude something that you believe should have been in there?
Not that I can recall, no.
I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Ratcliffe. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Good afternoon, Director Mueller.
Puede ser una trampa para
In
después.
your May 29th press conference, and again in your opening remarks this morning, you made it pretty clear you wanted the
Pero si hubiera
special
sido trampa,
counsel
la haría
report to
hecha
speak
misma,
for
pues, bueno.
itself.
Lo tiene cerrado.
You said at your press conference that that was the office's final position, and we will not comment on any other conclusions or hypotheticals about the president. Now, you spent the last few hours of your life from Democrats trying to get you to answer all kinds of hypotheticals about the president, and I expect that it may continue for the next few hours of your life. I think you've stayed pretty much true to what your intent and desire was, but I guess regardless of that, the special counsel's office is closed and it has no continuing jurisdiction or authority. So what would be your authority or jurisdiction for adding new conclusions or determinations to the special counsel's written report?
As to the latter, I don't know or expect changes in conclusions that we included in our report.
So to that point, you addressed one of the issues that I needed to, which was from your testimony this morning, which some construed as a change to the written report. You talked about the exchange that you had with Congressman Liu. I wrote it down a little bit different. I want to ask you about it so that the record's perfectly clear. I recorded that he asked you, quote, the reason you did not indict Donald Trump is because of the OLC opinion stating you cannot indict a sitting president, to which you responded, that is correct. That response is inconsistent. I think you'll agree with your written report.
Se le corrigió en su inicio,
I want to be clear
bueno,
that it is not your intent to change your written report. It is your intent to clarify the record to that effect.
As I started today, this afternoon, and added either a footnote or an endnote, what I wanted to clarify is the fact that we did not make any determination with regard to culpability in any way. We did not start that process down the road.
Terrific. Thank you for clarifying the record. A stated purpose of your appointment as special counsel was to ensure a full and thorough investigation of the Russian government efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. As part of that full and thorough investigation, what determination did the special counsel office make about whether the Steele dossier was part of the Russian government efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Again, when it comes to Mr. Steele, I defer to the Department of Justice.
Well, first of all, Director, I very much agree with your determination that Russia's efforts were sweeping and systematic. I think it should concern every American. That's why I want to know just how sweeping and systematic those efforts were. I want to find out if Russia interfered with our election by providing false information through sources to Christopher Steele about a Trump conspiracy that you determined didn't exist.
Well, I'm not going to discuss the issues with regard to Mr. Steele. And in terms of a portrayal of the conspiracies, we returned 2 indictments in the computer crimes arena, one GRU and another active measures in which we lay out in excruciating detail what occurred in those 2 rather large conspiracies.
I agree with respect to that, but why this is important is an application and 3 renewal applications were submitted by the United States government to spy or surveil on Trump campaign Carter associate, or Carter Page, and on all 4 occasions, the United States government submitted the Steele dossier as a central piece of evidence with respect to that. Now, the basic premise of the dossier, as you know, was that there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, but the special counsel investigation didn't establish any conspiracy, correct?
Well, what I can tell you is that the events that you are characterizing here now is part of another matter that is being handled by the Department of Justice.
But you did not establish any conspiracy, much less a well-developed one.
Again, I pass on answering that question.
The special counsel did not charge Carter Page with anything, correct?
Special counsel did not.
All right. My time has expired. I yield back. Ms. Sewell.
Director Mueller, I'd like to turn your attention to the June 9th, 2016 Trump Tower meeting. Slide 2, which should be on the screen now, is part of an email chain between Donald Trump Jr. and a publicist representing the son of a Russian oligarch. The email exchange ultimately led to the now infamous June 9th, 2016 meeting. The email from the publicist to Donald Trump Jr. reads in part, "The Crown Prosecutor of Russia offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and is a part of Russia and its government's support of Mr. Trump." In this email, Donald Trump Jr. is being told that the Russian government wants to pass along information which would hurt Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Trump Jr.'s response to that email is slide 3. He said, and I quote, "If it is what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." Then Donald Jr. Invited senior campaign officials, Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, to the meeting, did he not?
He did.
This email exchange is evidence of an offer of illegal assistance, is it not?
I cannot adopt that characterization.
But isn't it against the law for a presidential campaign to accept anything of value from a foreign government?
Generally speaking, yes, but generally the cases are unique.
Well, you say in page 184 in volume 1 that the federal campaign finance law broadly prohibits foreign nationals from making contributions, et cetera. And then you say that foreign nationals may not make a contribution or donation of money or anything of value. It says clearly in the report itself.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, let's turn to what actually happened at the meeting. When Donald Trump Jr. and the others got to the June 9th meeting, they realized that the Russian delegation didn't have the promised quote-unquote dirt. In fact, they got upset about that, did they not?
Generally, yes.
You say in volume 1, page 118, that Trump Jr. asked, what are we doing here? What do they have on Clinton? And during the meeting, Kushner actually texted Manafort saying it was, quote, a waste of time, end quote. Is that correct?
I believe it's in the report along the lines you specify.
So to be clear, top Trump campaign officials learned that Russia wanted to help Donald Trump's campaign by giving him dirt on his opponent. Trump Jr. said, loved it. Then he and senior officials held a meeting with the Russians to try to get that Russian help. But they were disappointed because the dirt wasn't as good as they had hoped. So to the next step, did anyone, to your knowledge, in the Trump campaign ever tell the FBI of this offer?
I don't believe so.
Did Donald Trump Jr. tell the FBI that they received an offer of help from the Russians?
I'm going that's about all I'll say on this aspect of it.
Wouldn't it be true, sir, that if they had reported it to the FBI or anyone in that campaign during the course of your 2-year investigation, you would have uncovered such a...
I would hope, yes.
Yes. Sir, is it not the responsibility of political campaigns to inform the FBI if they receive information from a foreign government?
I would think that that's something they would and should do.
Well, not only did the campaign not tell the FBI, they sought to hide the existence of the June 9th meeting for over a year. Is that not correct?
On the general characterization, I would question it. If you're referring to later initiative that flowed from the media, then...
No, what I'm suggesting is that you've said in volume 2, page 5, on several occasions the president directed aides not to publicly disclose the email setting up the June 9th meeting.
Yes, that's accurate.
Thanks. Sir, given this illegal assistance by Russians, you chose, even given that, you did not charge Donald Trump Jr. or any of the other senior officials with conspiracy. Is that right?
Correct.
And while it
when
may
you're
not...
talking about, if you're talking about other individuals, you're talking about the attendees.
Yes, that's
on
right.
June 9, and that's
right.
accurate.
So, Mr. Mueller, even though you didn't charge them with conspiracy, don't you think that the American people would be concerned that these 3 senior campaign officials eagerly sought a foreign adversary's help to win elections? And don't you think that reporting that is important, that we don't set a precedent for future elections?
I can't accept that characterization.
Well, listen, I think that it seems like a betrayal of American values to me, sir, that someone with, if not being criminal, is definitely unethical and wrong. And I would think that we would not want to set a precedent that political campaigns should not divulge of information if it's foreign government assistance. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Mueller, I have your opening statement, and in the beginning of your opening statement, you indicate that pursuant to Justice Department regulations, that you submitted a confidential report to the Attorney General at the conclusion of the investigation. What I'd like you to confirm is the report that you did, that is the subject matter of this hearing, was to the Attorney General.
Yes.
Now, you also state in this opening statement that you threw overboard the word collusion because it's not a legal term. You would not conclude because collusion was not a legal term.
Well, it depends on how you want to use the word. In the general parlance, people can think of it that way, but if you're talking about in the criminal statute arena, you can't, because it's much more aptly and accurately described as conspiracy.
Right, so in your words are, it's not a legal term, so you didn't put it in your conclusion, correct? That's what your opening statement says. Mr. Mueller, I want to talk about your powers and authorities. Now, the Attorney General in the appointment order gave you powers and authorities that reside in the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General has no ability to give you powers and authority greater than the powers and authority of the Attorney General, correct?
No, I don't believe, I think that is correct.
Mr. Mueller, I want to focus on one word in your report. It's the second to the last word in the report. It's exonerate. The report states, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it does not exonerate him. Now, in the judiciary hearing, in your prior testimony, you've already agreed with Mr. Radcliffe that exonerate is not a legal term, that there is not a legal test for this. So I have a question for you, Mr. Mueller. Mr. Mueller, does the Attorney General have the power or authority to exonerate? Now, what I'm putting up here is the United States Code. This is where the Attorney General gets his power, and the Constitution and the annotated cases of these, which we've searched. We even went to your law school, because I went to Case Western, but I thought maybe your law school teaches it differently, and we got the criminal law textbook from your law school. Mr. Mueller, nowhere in these, because we had them scanned, is there a process or description on exonerate. There's no office of exoneration at the Attorney General's office. There's no certificate at the bottom of his desk. Mr. Mueller, would you agree with me that the Attorney General does not have the power to exonerate?
I'm going to pass on that.
Why?
Because it embroils us in a legal discussion, and I'm not prepared to do a legal discussion in that arena.
Well, Mr. Mueller, you would not disagree with me when I say that there is no place that the Attorney General has the power to exonerate, and he's not been given that authority. You would not.
Again, I'm not going to. I take your question.
Right. Well, the one thing that I guess is that the Attorney General probably knows that he can't exonerate either. And that's the part that kind of confuses me. Because if the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, then you don't have the power to exonerate. And I believe he knows he doesn't have the power to exonerate. And so this is the part that I don't understand. If your report is to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, and he knows that you do not have that power, you don't have to tell him that you're not exonerating the president. He knows this already. So then that kind of changed the context for the report.
No, we included in the report for exactly that reason. He may not know it, and he should know it.
So you believe that the Attorney Bill Barr believes that somewhere in the hallways of the Department of Justice there's an office of exoneration?
No, that's not what I said.
Well, I believe he knows, and I don't believe you put that in there for Mr. Barr. I think you put that in there for exactly what I'm going to discuss next, and that is, so the Washington Post yesterday, when speaking of your report, the article said Trump could not be exonerated of trying to obstruct the investigation itself. Trump could not be exonerated. Now, that statement is correct, Mr. Mueller, isn't it, in that no one can be exonerated? The reporter wrote this reporter can't be exonerated. Mr. Mueller, you can't be exonerated. In fact, in our criminal justice system, there is no power or authority to exonerate. Now, this is my concern, Mr. Mueller. This is the headline on all of the news channels while you were testifying today. Mueller, Trump was not exonerated. Now, Mr. Mueller, what you know is that this can't say Mueller exonerated Trump, because you don't have the power or authority to exonerate Trump. You have no more power to declare him exonerated than you have the power to declare him Anderson Cooper. So the problem that I have here is that since there's no one in the criminal justice system that has that power, the president pardons, he doesn't exonerate. Courts and juries don't declare innocent, they declare not guilty. They don't even declare exoneration. The statement about exoneration is misleading, and it's meaningless, and it colors this investigation one word. out of the entire portion of your report, and it's a meaningless word that has no legal meaning, and it has colored your entire
Time
report.
of the gentleman has
I yield
expired.
back.
Aquí es cuando Mueller tendría que haber dicho, el presidente mismo
Carson.
dijo
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you,
que era una
Director Mueller,
total
for your years of
exoneración
service to our country. I want to look
para
more
él
closely,
el
sir,
informe.
at the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, an individual who I believe betrayed our country, who lied to a grand jury, who tampered with witnesses, and who repeatedly tried to use his position with the Trump campaign to make more money. Let's focus on the betrayal and greed. Your investigation, sir, found a number of troubling contacts between Mr. Manafort and Russian individuals during and after the campaign. Is that right, sir?
Correct. Correct.
In addition to the June 9th meeting just discussed, Manafort also met several times with a man named Konstantin Kilimnik, who the FBI assessed to have ties with Russian intel agencies. Is that right, sir?
Correct.
In fact, Mr. Manafort didn't just meet with him, he shared private Trump campaign polling information with this man linked to Russian intelligence. Is that right, sir?
That is correct.
And in turn, the information was shared with a Russian oligarch tied to Vladimir Putin. Is that right, sir?
Allegedly.
Director Mueller, meeting with him wasn't enough. Sharing internal polling information wasn't enough. Mr. Manafort went so far as to offer this Russian oligarch tied to Putin a private briefing on the campaign. Is that right, sir?
Yes, sir.
And finally, Mr. Manafort also discussed internal campaign strategy on 4 battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota, with the Russian intelligence-linked individual. Did he not, sir?
And that's reflected in the report, as were the items you listed previously.
Director Mueller, based on your decades of years of experience at the FBI, would you agree, sir, that it creates a national security risk when a presidential campaign chairman shares private polling information on the American people, private political strategy related to winning the votes of the American people, and private information about American battleground states with a foreign adversary?
Is that the question, sir?
Yes, sir.
I'm not going to speculate along those lines. To the extent that it's within the lines of the report, then I support it. Anything beyond that is not part of that which I would support.
Well, I think it does, sir. I think it shows an infuriating lack of patriotism from the very people seeking the highest office in the land. Director Mueller, Manafort didn't share this information in exchange for nothing, did he, sir?
I can't answer that question without knowing more about the question.
Well, it's clear that he hoped to be paid back money he was owed by Russian or Ukrainian oligarchs in return for the passage of private campaign information, correct?
That is true.
Director Mueller, as my colleague Mr. Heck will discuss later, greed corrupts. Would you agree, sir, that the sharing of private campaign information in exchange for money represents a particular kind of corruption, one that presents a national security risk to our country, sir?
I'm not going to opine on that. I don't have the expertise in that arena to really opine.
Would you agree, sir, that Manafort's contacts with Russians close to Vladimir Putin and his efforts to exchange private information on Americans for money left him vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians?
I think generally so, that would be the case.
Would you agree, sir, that these acts demonstrated a betrayal of the democratic values of our country rests on?
I can't agree with that.
Director Mueller.
Not that it's not true, but I cannot agree with it.
Yes, sir. Director Mueller, well, I can tell you that in my years of experience as a law enforcement officer and as a member of Congress, fortunate to serve on the Intel Committee, I know enough to say yes. Trading political secrets for money with a foreign adversary can corrupt, and it can leave you open to blackmail, and it certainly represents a betrayal of the values underpinning our democracy. I want to thank you for your service again, Director Mueller. We appreciate you for coming today. I yield back, Chairman.
Dr. Wenstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here today. Mr. Mueller, is it accurate to say your investigation found no evidence that members of the Trump campaign were involved in the theft or publication of Clinton campaign-related emails?
Can you read, or can you repeat the question?
Is it accurate to say your investigation found no evidence that members of the Trump campaign were involved in the theft or publication of the Clinton campaign-related emails?
I don't know. I don't know what the, well.
Well, Volume 1, page 5, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So it would therefore be inaccurate, based on this, to describe that finding as open to doubt, that finding being that a Trump campaign was involved with theft or publication of the Clinton campaign emails. Are you following that, sir?
I do believe I'm following it, but it is that portion of that matter, it does not fall within our jurisdiction or fall within our investigation.
Well, based on what your report says, Volume 1, page 5, I just want to be clear that open to doubt is how the committee Democrats described this finding in their minority views of our 2018 report. And it kind of flies in the face of what you have in your report. But so is it accurate also to say the investigation found no documentary evidence that George Papadopoulos told anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign about Joseph Mifsid's claims that the Russians had dirt on candidate Clinton?
Let me turn that over to Mr. Zebley.
I'd like to ask you, sir. This is your report, and that's what I'm basing this on.
And then could you repeat the question for me again?
Yeah, is it accurate to say the investigation found no documentary evidence that George Papadopoulos told anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign about Joseph Mifsid's claims that the Russians had dirt on candidate Clinton?
I believe it appearing in the report that it's accurate.
Okay, so in the report, it says no documentary evidence that Papadopoulos shared this information with the campaign. It's therefore inaccurate to conclude that by the time of the June 9, 2016 Trump Tower meeting, quote, the campaign was likely already on notice via George Papadopoulos' contact with Russian agents that Russia, in fact, had damaging information on Trump's opponent. Would you say that that is inaccurate to say that it's likely already on?
I could direct you to the report.
Well, I appreciate that because the Democrats jumped to this incorrect collusion in their minority views, again, which contradicts what you have in your report. I'm concerned about a number of statements I'd like you to clarify because a number of Democrats have made some statements that I have concerns with, and maybe you can clear them up. So a member of this committee said President Trump was a Russian agent after your report was publicly released. That statement is not supported by your report, correct?
That is accurate. It's not supported.
Multiple Democrat members have asserted that Paul Manafort met with Julian Assange in 2016 before WikiLeaks released DNC emails implying Manafort colluded with Assange. Because your report does not mention finding evidence that Manafort met with Assange, I would assume that means you found no evidence of this meeting. Is that assumption correct?
I'm not certain I agree with that assumption.
But you make no mention of it in your report. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, Mr. Mueller, does your report contain any evidence that President Trump was enrolled in the Russian system of compromat as a member of this committee once claimed?
Well, what I can speak to is information and evidence that we picked up as the special counsel, and I think that's accurate as far as it goes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's go for a second to scope. Did you ask the Department of Justice to expand
Según
the scope
nosotros,
of the
no.
special counsel's
Pero
mandate related to August 2nd, 2017 or August 20th, 2017 scoping memoranda?
Well, without looking at the memoranda, I could not answer that.
Well, let me ask you, did you ever make a request to expand your office's mandate at all?
Generally, yes.
And was that ever denied?
I'm not going to speak to that.
You're not going
It goes to internal deliberations.
Well, I'm just trying to understand process. Does expanding the scope come from the acting attorney general or Rosenstein, or does it come from you, or can it come from either?
I'm not going to discuss any other alternatives.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that you're the greatest patriot in this room today, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You said in your report, and I'm going to quibble with your words, that the Russian intervention was sweeping and systematic. I would quibble with that because I don't think it was just an intervention. I think it was an invasion. And I don't think it was just sweeping and systematic. I think it was sinister and scheming. But having said that, one of my colleagues earlier here referred to this Russian intervention as a hoax. And I'd like to get your comment on that. On page 26 of your report, you talk about the Internet Research Agency and how tens of millions of U.S. persons
La Internet Research
became
Agency es
engaged with
el vehículo
the posts
del
that
gobierno
they
ruso
made,
para
that there were some
intervenir
80,000
redes
posts
sociales y
on
elecciones en todas partes del
Facebook.
mundo.
Conocida también como la
Facebook
troll
itself
farm,
admitted
la
that
troll
fábrica
126
de
million
trolls.
people had probably seen the posts
O
that
la
were put
granja
up by the
de
Internet
trolls.
Research Agency, that they had 3,800 Twitter accounts and had designed more than 175,000 tweets that probably reached 1.4 million people. The Internet Research Agency was spending about $1.25 million a month on all of this social media in the United States in what I would call an invasion in our country. Would you agree that it was not a hoax, that the Russians were engaged in trying to impact our election?
Absolutely. That was not a hoax. The indictments we returned against the Russians, 2 different ones, were substantial in their scope, using that scope word again. And I think we have underplayed to a certain extent that aspect of our investigation that has and would have long-term damage to the United States that we need to move quickly to address.
Thank you for that. I'd like to drill down on that a little bit more. The Internet Research Agency actually started in 2014 by sending over staff as tourists, I guess, to start looking at where they wanted to engage. And there are many that suggest, and I'm interested in your opinion, as to whether or not Russia is presently in the United States looking for ways to impact the 2020 election.
I can't speak to that. That would be in levels of classification.
All right. Let me ask you this. Oftentimes when we engage in these hearings, we forget the forest for the trees. You have a very large report here of over 400 pages. Most Americans have not read it. We have read it. Actually, the FBI director yesterday said he hadn't read it, which was a little discouraging. But on behalf of the American people, I want to give you a minute and 39 seconds to tell the American people what you would like them to glean from this report.
Well, we spent substantial time assuring the integrity of the report, understanding that it would be our living message to those who come after us. But it also is a signal, a flag to those of us who have some responsibility in this area to exercise those responsibilities swiftly and don't let this problem continue to linger as it has over so many years.
All right. You didn't take the whole amount of time, so I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Le ofreció 1 minuto y medio Mueller y Mueller usó 20
ask you
segundos.
about conspiracy. Generally, a conspiracy requires an offer of something illegal, the acceptance of that offer, and an overt act in furtherance of it. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Don Jr. was made aware that the Russians were offering dirt on his opponent, correct?
I don't know that for sure, but one would assume, given presence at the meeting.
And when you say that you would love to get that help, that would constitute an acceptance of the offer?
It's a wide open request.
And it would certainly be evidence of an acceptance if you say, when somebody offers you something illegal and you say, I would love it, that would be considered evidence of an acceptance.
I'm going to stay away from any addressing one particular or 2 particular situations.
Well, this particular situation, well, I'll have to continue in a bit. Now yield to Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Mueller, it's been a long day. Thank you for being here. I do have a series of important questions for you, but before I do that, I want to take a moment to reemphasize something that my friend Mr. Turner has said.
Llegó con
I've heard many
cartulina.
people state no person is above the law. And many times recently they add not even the president, which I think is blazingly obvious to most of us.
I'm having a little problem hearing you, sir.
Is this better?
That is better, thank you.
I want you to know I agree with this statement that no person is above the law. But there's another principle that we also have to defend, and that is the presumption of innocence. And I'm sure you agree with this principle, though I think the way that your office phrased some parts of your report, it does make me wonder. I have to be honest with you. For going on 3 years, innocent people have been accused of very serious crimes, including treason. Accusations made even here today. They have had their lives disrupted and in some cases destroyed by false accusations for which there is absolutely no basis other than some people desperately wish that it was so.
La cámara de
But your
CISPAN se está
report is very
moviendo.
clear. No evidence of conspiracy, no evidence of coordination. And I believe we owe it to these people who have been falsely accused, including the president and his family, to make that very clear. Mr. Mueller, the credibility of your report is based on the integrity of how it is handled. And there's something that I think bothers me and other Americans. I'm holding here in my hand a binder of 25 examples of leaks that occurred from the special counsel's office from those who associated with your work, dating back to as early as a few weeks after your inception and the beginning of your work, and continuing up to just a few months ago. All of them have one thing in common. They were designed to weaken or to embarrass the president, every single one. Never was it leaked that you'd found no evidence of collusion. Never was it leaked that the Steele dossier was a complete fantasy, nor that it was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign. I could go on and on. Mr. Mueller, are you aware of anyone from your team having given advance knowledge of the raid on Roger Stone's home to any person or the press, including CNN?
I'm not going to talk about specifics. I will mention, but talk for a moment about persons who become involved in an investigation. And the understanding that in a lengthy, thorough investigation, some persons will be under a cloud that should not be under a cloud. And one of the reasons for emphasizing, as I have, the speed of an election, or not election, the speed of an investigation, is that so those persons who are disrupted as a result of the...
I appreciate that, but I do have a series of questions.
with the result of that investigation.
Thank you, and you're right, it is a cloud, and it's an unfair cloud for dozens of people. But to my point, are you aware of anyone providing information to the media regarding the raid on Roger Stone's home, including CNN?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Okay. Mr. Mueller, you sent a letter dated March 27th to Attorney General Barr in which you claimed the Attorney General's memo to Congress did not fully capture the context of your report. You stated earlier today that response was not authorized. Did you make any effort to determine who leaked this confidential letter?
No, and I'm not certain. This is the letter of March 27th?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm not certain when it was publicized. I do know it was publicized, but I do not believe we would be responsible for the leaks.
Well,
I do believe that we have done a good job in assuring that no leaks occur.
We have 25 examples here of where you did not do a good job. Not you, sir. I'm not accusing you at all. But where your office did not do a good job in protecting this information. One more example. Do you know anyone who anonymously made claims to the press that Attorney General Barr's March 24th letter to Congress had been misrepresented or misrepresented the basis of your report?
What was the question?
Lo que tiene,
Do you know who anonymously made claims to the press that Attorney General Barr's March 24th letter to Congress had misrepresented the findings of your report?
Mueller no filtró nada. Lo que tiene en la carpeta son reservas de prensa que son por gente que habló, fue interrogada por la oficina de Mueller.
What I'd like to ask is,
Abogados que sueltan algo son los claros.
well, sir, this was your work. You're the only one, your office is the only one who had information regarding this. It had to come from your office.
Dile, abre la primera hueva y analicémosla. Abre la primera de las 25 huevas. Y después de eso la segunda, hasta que lleguemos a la 25.
From the outset, we've undertaken to make certain that we minimize the possibility of leaks. And I think we were successful over the 2 years that we were in operation.
Well, I wish you'd been more successful, sir. I think it was disruptive to the American people. My time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for being here. This too shall pass. Earlier today and throughout the day, you have stated the policy that a seated president cannot be indicted, correct?
Correct.
And upon questioning this morning, you were asked, could a president be indicted after their service, correct?
Yes,
And your answer was that they could.
they could.
Director, please speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry, thank you.
So
They could.
the follow-up question that should be concerning is, what if a president serves beyond the statute of limitations?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Would it not indicate that if the statute of limitations on federal crimes such as this are 5 years, that a president who serves a second term is therefore under the policy above the law?
I'm not certain I would agree with the, I'm not certain I would agree with the conclusion. I'm not certain that I can see
But the
the
statute doesn't,
possibility that you suggest.
but the statute doesn't toll, is that correct?
I don't know specifically.
It clearly doesn't. And I just want, as the American
No le está
public
yendo
is
bien a
watching
Mike
this
Quigley
and perhaps learning
en su
about many of these for the
interrogatorio.
first time, we need to consider that and that the other alternatives are perhaps all that we have. But I appreciate your response. Earlier in questioning, someone mentioned that it was a question involving whether anyone in the Trump political world publicized the emails, whether or not that was the case. I just want to refer to volume 1, page 60, where we learn that Trump Jr. publicly tweeted a link to the leak of stolen Podesta emails in October of 2016. You're familiar with that?
I am.
So that would at least be a republishing of this information, would it not?
I'm not certain I would agree. I'm not certain I would agree with that.
Director Pompeo assessed WikiLeaks in one point as a hostile intelligence service. Given your law enforcement experience and your knowledge of what WikiLeaks did here and what they do generally, would you assess that to be accurate or something similar? How would you assess what WikiLeaks does?
Absolutely. And they are currently under indictment. It's Julian Assange.
But would it be fair to describe them as, you would agree with Mr. Director Pompeo, that's what he was when he made that remark, that it's a hostile intelligence service, correct?
Yes.
If we could put up slide 6. This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. Do any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
How do you react to them?
It's probably problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays in terms of giving some hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
Volume 1, page 59. Donald Trump Jr. had direct electronic communications with WikiLeaks during the campaign period. On October 3rd, 2016, WikiLeaks sent another direct message to Trump Jr. asking you guys to help disseminate a link alleging candidate Clinton had advocated a drone to attack Julian Assange. Trump Jr. responded that, quote, he had already done so. Same question. This behavior, at the very least, disturbing your reaction?
Disturbing and also subject to investigation.
Could it be described as aid and comfort to a hostile intelligence service, sir?
I wouldn't categorize it with any specificity.
I yield the balance to the chairman, please.
Not sure I can make good use of 27 seconds, but Director, I think you made it clear that you think it unethical, to put it politely, to tout a foreign service like WikiLeaks publishing stolen political documents in a presidential campaign?
Certainly calls for investigation.
Thank you, Director. We're going to go now to Mr. Crawford, and then after Mr. Crawford's 5 minutes, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. Days after your appointment, Peter Strzok texted about his concern that there's, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did Strzok or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
Who? Can you repeat that?
Peter Strzok.
Could you, I'm sorry, can you move the microphone up a little closer?
Sure. There's
Thank you.
There's a quote attributed to Peter Strzok. He texted about his concern that there is, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did he or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
No.
Is the Inspector General report correct that the text messages from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's phones from your office were not retained after they left the special counsel's office?
Well, I don't, it depends on what you're talking about. The investigation into those Peter Strzok went on for a period of time, and I'm not certain what it encompasses. It may well have encompassed what you're adverting to.
Okay, let me move on just real quickly. Did you ask the department to authorize your office to investigate the origin of the Trump-Russia investigation?
I'm not going to get into that. It goes to internal deliberations.
So the circumstances surrounding the origin of the investigation have yet to be fully vetted then. I'm certainly glad that Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham are looking into this matter. With that, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the ranking member, Nunes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to make sure you're aware of who Fusion GPS is. Fusion GPS is a political operations firm that was working directly for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democrat National Committee. They produced the dossier. So they paid Steele, who then went out and got the dossier. And I know you don't want to answer any dossier questions, so I'm not going there. But your report mentions Natalia Vesnitskaya 65 times. She meets in the Trump Tower. It's this infamous Trump Tower meeting. It's in your report. You've heard many of the Democrats refer to it today. The meeting was shorter than 20 minutes, I believe. Is that correct?
I think what we have in our report reflects it was about that length.
So do you know, so Fusion GPS, the main actor at Fusion GPS, the president of the company, or the owner of the company, is a guy named Glenn Simpson who's working for Hillary Clinton. Glenn Simpson, do you know how many times Glenn Simpson met with Natalia Vesnitskaya?
Myself? No.
Would it surprise you that the Clinton campaign dirty ops arm met with Natalia Vesnitskaya more times than the Trump campaign did?
Well, this is an area that I'm not going to get into, as I indicated at the outset.
Did you ever interview Glenn Simpson?
I'm going to pass on that.
According to, I'm going to change topics here. According to notes from the State Department official Kathleen Kavalak, Christopher Steele told her that former Russian intelligence head Trubnikov and Putin advisor Surkov were sources for the Steele dossier. Now, knowing that these are, not getting into whether these sources were real or not real, was there any concern that there could have been disinformation that was going from the Kremlin into the Clinton campaign and then being fed into the FBI?
As I said before, this is an area that I cannot speak to.
Is that because it's not in the report, or or because of an ongoing
Internal
investigation?
deliberations, other proceedings, and the like.
Okay. When Andrew Weissman and Zaneb Ahmed joined your team, were you aware that Bruce Orr, Department of Justice top official, directly briefed the dossier allegations to them in the summer of 2016?
Again, I'm not going to speak to that issue.
Okay. Before you arrested George Papadopoulos in July of 2017, he was given $10,000 in cash in Israel. Do you know who gave him that cash?
Again, it's outside our ambit, and questions such as that should go to the FBI or the department.
But it involved your investigation.
It involved persons involved in my investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We will stand in recess for 5 or 10 minutes. Please, folks, remain in your seats. Allow the director, Mr. Zebley, to exit the chamber.
Ahora para mí interesante es que me preguntaban a Zebley, que es el brazo derecho.
Comenzaron los 5 a 10 minutos de descanso. Supongo que estamos cerca de la mitad, o ya no, pasadito la mitad de este segundo interrogatorio. Esta comisión es más chica, tiene menos miembros, así que siendo que cada uno tiene también 5 minutos, es más corto. De hecho, la primera comisión se supone que tenía 3 horas de tiempo, tomaron como 3 horas y media, un poquito más, y esta se supone que tiene 2 horas de tiempo, así que ya tenemos 1 hora y cuarto, más o menos, así que la segunda mitad probablemente sea aún más corta. Eso, perdón. Felipe, ¿qué te parece hasta ahora?
Yo estoy curioso por el juramento que tomó el brazo derecho de Mueller, que no le han preguntado nada.
Yo también estoy muy curioso por eso. ¿Cuál es la razón
pregunta
por la que está ahí? Y nadie le ha preguntado nada, y él no ha intervenido, y él no ha dicho nada. Tengo dudas con respecto a eso, no sé.
A mí me parece en todo caso que...
Quizá ahora está como backup, como seguridad por si acaso. No sé.
Me da la impresión a mí que hasta ahora como va la cosa...
Acércate más a la cámara para que...
Okay. Hasta ahora como va la cosa, tengo la impresión de que...
Deja de tocar tanto el micrófono. Tú siempre me dijiste que no se puede tocar esta weá y...
No pegarle así.
Bueno.
Que en el fondo va a presionar más a los demócratas por el impeachment, pero por otra parte creo que tanto los demócratas como los republicanos hoy tienen, no sé, 2, 3, hasta 4 cuñas buenas para pasar el loop en Fox News, con algunas respuestas de Mueller para reforzar su narrativa. Ahora, claro, el problema es que Mueller fue claro y le preguntaron, menos mal, ¿es una witch hunt? No es una cacería de brujas. No es. ¿Es un cuento del tío? ¿Es un hoax? No es un hoax. La interferencia rusa y el ataque ruso a las elecciones gringas. Así que... y creo que la que va a dar vuelta de esta... quizás la cuña que va a dar vuelta, al menos hasta ahora en este comité, va a ser es la cuña que sacó Mueller cuando le preguntaron, ¿no le parecería a usted, dado que incluso el secretario de Estado actual se refirió a Wikileaks como una agencia de inteligencia hostil a los Estados Unidos, el publicar o divulgar o decir que me encanta Wikileaks, que bueno, no hay a la hora de leer más Wikileaks, ya pues Wikileaks saquen más emails, es perturbador para usted. Y él dijo, problemático sería por lo bajo.
Sería poco, sí, claro.
Sería poco.
Sí, han habido varias cosas en esta vuelta. Creo que ha sido bien complementaria a la anterior, pero no ha sido lo explosiva que nos hubiera gustado tampoco.
Me gustó cómo empezó Adam Schiff en todo caso. Espero que él retome un poco porque él es como bien rápido, al principio.
Sí. Él claro, es como medio como la escuela Ocasio Cortés para
claro.
Donde utiliza la oportunidad de tener que enfrente, no para estar preguntando sobre información, no, él sabe perfectamente toda la información que está preguntando, sino que es para construir una historia, para construir un argumento, para ir cerrando agujeros argumentales y dejar bien claro más o menos cómo fueron las cosas.
¿Y se fijaron cómo mira Adam Schiff a la cámara y mira a Mueller así? Se preguntan las cosas más terribles así. ¿No le parece que esto es altamente perjudicial a los intereses de Estados Unidos? Su mente es como Mr. Spock. Pero yo creo que está bien elegido para dirigir el comité de inteligencia, para manejar información clasificada y en forma desapasionada.
Sí, absolutamente. Sí.
Qué diferencia, por ejemplo, no sé, un comité como el de Elijah Cummings, que es como el de comité de fiscalización al oversight. Que claro, uno puede... La termocefalia un poco puede ayudar un poco políticamente. Interesante el argumento también del republicano en el sentido de que uso el lenguaje de no exoneración de Donald Trump, pese a que exonerar no es un término legal. Ahora, en todo caso, no lo dejó contestar, pero creo que la respuesta de ahí era, bueno, creo que esa frase se justifica plenamente dado la reacción bueno, no hubiese dicho eso, quizás del presidente, dado que él dijo que era una completa exoneración, que ha completamente exonerado el reporte. Entonces, si tiene problemas con el término, parta con el primer cargo autoridad del país. Así que el primer mandatario, como se dice acá. El primer mandatario lo escuchaba en dictadura un montón. El primer mandatario...
No, sí, yo creo que... No sé. No
sí, bueno, que yo nací en dictadura. Yo nací en dictadura, entonces claro, el primer mandatario, excelentísimo.
Por eso son nuestras tendencias autoritarias.
Claro, su excelencia.
Cállate.
Capital General. Me acuerdo del póster que salía en la campaña No, que era un póster de Daniel López. Una pintura, en realidad, un retrato. Entonces era como de los pies a la cabeza. Entonces salían todos los títulos que se habían mandado a poner. Ciudadano ilustre de Tahuatahua. Y uno de los que me gusta más, presidente honorífico de Colo Colo. Príncipe de INACAP.
No, pero como príncipe.
¿Príncipe de INACAP?
¿Príncipe de INACAP? ¿Pinochet era príncipe de INACAP?
Sí, uno de esos era un príncipe.
¿Cómo hacer príncipe?
Sí. Pero dictadura, hombre.
No, pero...
Para ponerlo en contexto.
Pero no puede ser tan... tan ridículo.
Bueno.
Algo, sí, pero...
Miren, yo no sé si alguno de ustedes es pinochetista, pero esto es un hecho objetivo.
¿Sería más Boris Johnson que Pinochet?
Esto es un hecho objetivo de la historia chilena. En el atentado del Melocotón...
Hablas desde un poco más allá, cosa que se te vea la cara.
Ahí.
No, por otro lado.
Ahí. El atentado del Melocotón, murieron 4 escoltas de Pinochet. Lo atacaron con bazucas, armas automáticas. El rocket que impactó el auto de Pinochet no explotó porque eran terroristas, como decía Pinochet, o extremistas, o guerrilleros, como ustedes quieran llamarlo, ineptos. Entonces no alcanzó a armarse el cohete. Ahora, interesantemente, Pinochet estaba atrás con su nieto sentado. Y mientras uno de los carabineros combatió, y de hecho los mismos frentistas dijeron que fue el más bravo en el combate, Pinochet, sabiendo que obviamente él era el objetivo del atentado, él tenía 2 opciones: salir, tomar su arma de servicio, agarrar porque seguro que había ahí armas, o al menos un arma, salir a combatir, por último sin arma, para atraer el fuego y salvar a su nieto, porque ya había volado otro auto de la comitiva, ya había volado en pedazos, ya habían tirado un rocket. Se quería en el fondo traer el fuego para salvar a su nieto. Lo ideal era salir del auto, combatiendo o no combatiendo, ojalá combatiendo para él, porque lo mataban a él y se acaba la historia. O sea, listo. Pero lo que él hizo fue acurrucarse con su nieto. Eso fue su actitud, en el fondo, para cubrirlo. ¿Cubrirlo de qué? Si era un auto blindado. Abrazó a su nieto para protegerlo, según él, ahí mostrando la entrevista con la Esquirla. Ahora, lo interesante es que...
Yo no creo que en esas situaciones uno haga largas disquisiciones al respecto de cuáles
uno
son
puede decir, sí, uno puede decir, pero él,
bastante más instintivo que otra cosa.
Sí, justamente.
Sin ser defensa de esa bestia gorila culiao, pero...
Justamente, pero él, a diferencia de, bueno, lo que él, sus fans dicen es un soldado de la patria. Y perdóname, si alguien debiese saber qué hacer bajo fuego, es un soldado. Más encima un soldado de infantería que era él, bueno, uno puede decir que eso no es lo más brillante.
Había sido un soldado de la patria, luego, cuando se supo que era un ladrón, su calificación de soldado de la patria estuvo en duda. Hoy día, cuando vemos que todos los soldados de la patria son ladrones,
Claro, pero era
vemos
militar,
que efectivamente
digamos.
fue un
Era
soldado
militar,
de la
digamos.
patria, era un militar, un general, con todos los elementos, un gallo que...
Y logró enseñar, claro, o malformar a cuantos militares en la Academia de Guerra. Ahora, el punto no es ese. El punto no es que fue un guarén de Ratus norvegicus en nombre científico, un guarén durante el atentado y se acurrucó con su nieto en vez de salir a combatir o atar el fuego, sino que no es eso, sino que días después, un par de semanas, se mandó poner la medalla al valor en combate.
Bueno.
Y entonces, eso alucinante. Lo encuentro, de hecho, incluso creo que los escoltas no agarraron la...
No, sí.
Yo tengo mis dudas.
Les puso medalla a los escoltas-vivos y los muertos.
No. Y él en particular, ahora, lo que haya estado incluido él como valor en combate es absolutamente psicodélico. Imagínate, valor en combate. ¿Qué valor, huevón? Si estuviste, te acurrucaste como guarén con tu nieto, para, en el fondo, haciendo que tu nieto corra a tu misma suerte, esencialmente. Porque, bueno, claro.
No es esa la... Bueno,
eso me era con su...
bueno, no sé por qué estamos hablando de esto. En este momento están entrando lentamente de vuelta los congresistas a ocupar sus asientos y en un ratito va a estar volviendo...
Sí, yo tengo una especie de
Robert Mueller para la última patita de esta jornada maratónica que me ha tenido aquí transmitiendo desde las... nos han tenido desde las 8:30 de la mañana, con una pequeña pausa en la que... de hecho, no comentamos. En la pequeña pausa fuimos entre la comisión y comisión, fuimos a un nuevo local que se abrió acá. Es decente, tiene su... no.
En todo caso, para hacer un argumento más respecto a Mueller. Pinochet era milico de carrera. Mueller se enlistó en los Marines para combatir en Vietnam. Si Mueller le hiciera un atentado, yo le pongo a ficha que Mueller está con el nieto a disparar, a hacer lo que sea. No el guarén, capitán general Daniel López, Augusto Ugarte y todos los alias.
¿Qué almorzamos, Felipe?
Almorzamos un rumano.
En la fuente alemana.
Así es.
Buen rumano. Me gusta el rumano.
Sí, es muy rumano. Bien condimentado. A mí me gusta la comida condimentada.
Yo creo que el segundo rumano en menos de una semana nos comemos, ¿no es cierto?
Así es.
O sea,
estamos como Rumanov.
Poco sano, sí.
Puede ser un programa Los Rumanovs.
Pero bueno, como que volvió Nadia Comaneci, como que tiró como un video. Creo que se cumplió como el aniversario de los no sé cuántos años de su 10 olímpico. Así que eso, bueno, estuvimos en la fuente alemana. Y hemos estado acá desde las 8:30 de la mañana y ya viene la última patita de toda esta jornada. Yo personalmente llevo como 3-4 días sin dormir por distintas cosas. Ayer estuve en CNN, pueden mirarme en un pedacito del programa 360 con Daniel Matamala, en el que estuvimos hablando sobre Boris Johnson, también política internacional.
El otro, el cabeza de pichí, habiendo tomado mucho líquido con diurético, digamos. No es naranjo, pero es más clarito.
Claro, no sé. No, Boris es un personaje muy particular. Bueno, Donald también. Son bien distintos, eso sí. Quienes nos igualan creo que son bastante distintos. Tienen cosas en común, como esta necesidad de estar siempre en el centro de atención de todo, y también esta deshonestidad total y absoluta. Casi adicción a la deshonestidad.
Perdón, el que está a la izquierda de este señor, que es el presidente de la Comisión de Inteligencia, se llama David Nunes, que es el número 1, digamos, medio de autoridad de los republicanos, y les cuento que objetivamente es más tonto que una puerta.
Vuelve el sonido.
That if a witness or suspect lies or obstructs or tampers with witnesses or destroys evidence during an investigation, that generally that conduct can be used to show a consciousness of guilt. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Let's go through the different people associated with the Trump campaign and this investigation who lied to you and other investigators to cover up their disloyal and unpatriotic conduct. If we could put Exhibit 8 up. Director Mueller, I'm showing you Campaign Chairman Paul Manafort, political advisor Roger Stone,
Mira qué
Deputy
bueno este
Campaign
gráfico.
Manager Rick Gates, National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's personal attorney Michael Cohen, and Foreign Policy Advisor George
Eso es como,
Papadopoulos. These six individuals
el don
have each
con el
been charged,
capo regime,
convicted, or
con
lied
los,
to your
capos
officer or
abajo,
other
ahí al lado con el
Yes,
consigliere.
although I look askance at Mr. Stone because he is he is in a different case here in D.C.
So National Security Advisor Flynn lied about discussions with Russian ambassador related to sanctions. Is that right?
That's correct.
Michael Cohen lied to this committee about Trump Tower Moscow. Is that correct?
Yes.
George Papadopoulos, the president's senior foreign policy advisor, lied to the FBI about his communications about Russia's possession of dirt on Hillary Clinton. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, lied about meetings that he had with someone with ties to Russian intelligence. Is that correct?
That's true.
And your investigation was hampered by Trump campaign officials' use of encryption communications. Is that right?
We believe that to be the case.
Oh.
You also believe to be the
¿Dijo?
case that your
Le
investigation was
preguntó si
hampered
es
by the
que
deletion of electronic messages. Is that
se
correct?
encriptaron
It would
miembros
be,
del
yes. Generally,
círculo de Trump
any, case
mientras él
would
está
be
investigando, empezaron a usar
Those kinds of communications are used.
For example, you noted that Deputy Campaign Manager Rick Gates, who shared internal campaign polling data with the person with ties to Russian intelligence at the direction of Manafort, that Mr. Gates deleted those communications on a daily basis. Is that right?
I take your word. I say I don't know specifically, but if it's in the report, then I support it.
That's right, Director. It's Volume 1, page 136.
Thank you.
In addition to that, other information was inaccessible because your office determined it was protected by attorney-client privilege. Is that correct?
That is true.
That would include that you do not know whether communications between Donald Trump and his personal attorneys, Jay Sekulow, Rudy Giuliani, and others discouraged witnesses from cooperating with the government. Is that right?
I'm not going to talk to that.
That would also mean that you can't talk to whether or not pardons were dangled through the president's attorneys because the shield of attorney-client privilege.
I'm not going to discuss that.
Interesante.
Did you want to interview Donald Trump Jr.?
And I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you subpoena Donald Trump Jr.?
And I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you want to interview the president?
Yes.
Director Mueller, on January 1st, 2017 through March 2019, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in person 6 times, called him 10 times, and exchanged 4 letters with him. Between that time period, how many times did you meet with Donald Trump?
I'm not going to get into that.
He did not meet with you in person, is that correct?
He did not.
As a result of lies, deletion of text messages, obstruction, and witness tampering, is it fair to say that you were unable to fully assess the scope and scale of Russia's interference in the 2016 election and Trump's role in that interference?
I'm not certain I would adopt that characterization in total. There may be pieces of it that are accurate, but not in total.
But you did state in Volume 1, page 10, that while this report embodies factual and legal determinations, the office believes it to be accurate and complete to the greatest extent possible. Given these identified gaps, the office cannot rule out the possibility that the unavailable information would shed additional light. Is that correct?
That is correct. We don't know what we don't know.
Why is it so important that witnesses cooperate and tell the truth in an investigation like this?
Because the testimony of the witnesses goes to the heart of just about any criminal case you have.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back. And thank you, Director Mueller.
Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, as special counsel, did you review documents related to the origin of the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign?
On occasion.
Was the Steele dossier one of those documents that was reviewed?
And I can't discuss that case.
I'm just asking a process question. Have you read the Steele dossier?
And again, I'm not going to respond to that.
You were tasked as special counsel to investigate whether there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign associates to interfere with the 2016 election. And the FBI, we know, has relevant documents and information related to the opening of the CI investigation. Were you and your team permitted to access all of those documents?
And again, I can't get into that investigative, what we collected and what we're doing with investigation materials.
Let me ask it this way. Was there any limitation in your access to documents related to the counterintelligence?
That's such a broad question. I have real trouble answering it.
Did the special counsel's office undertake any efforts to investigate and verify or disprove allegations contained in the Steele dossier?
Again, I can't respond.
The reason I'm asking for the American public that is watching, it's apparent that the Steele dossier formed part of the basis to justify the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. As we know, it was used to obtain a FISA warrant on Carter Page. This is why I'm asking these questions. Did your office undertake any efforts to identify Steele's sources or subsources?
Again, the same answer.
Were these tasks referred to any other agencies?
Again, I can't speak to it.
Did your office consider whether the Russian government used Steele's sources to provide Steele with disinformation?
Again, I can't speak to that.
I understand I'm asking these questions just for the record, so thanks for your patience. Shifting gears here, did any member of the special counsel's office staff travel overseas as part of the investigation?
Yes, but I can't go further than that.
I'm going to ask, to which countries?
And I can't answer that.
Did they meet with foreign government officials?
Again, it's out of our bailiwick.
Did they meet with foreign private citizens?
Again, same response.
Did they seek information about a U.S. citizen or any U.S. citizens?
Again, a territory that I cannot go to.
Thank you for answering on the record. These are important questions for the American public, and we're hopeful that the IG is able to answer these questions. I will yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to go back to, we started off with Joseph Mifsud, who's at the center of this investigation. He appears in your report a dozen times or more. He really is the epicenter. He's at the origin of this. He's the man who supposedly knows about Clinton's emails. You've seen on the screen, the Democrats have continually put up all the prosecutions that you made against Trump campaign officials and others. But I'm struggling to understand why you didn't indict Joseph Mifsud, who seems to be the man in the middle of all of this.
Well, I think you understand that you cannot get into either classified or law enforcement information without a rationale for doing it. And I have said all I'm going to be able to say with regard to Mr. Mifsud.
Were you aware
non è
of
tanto
Kathleen
frustrado.
Cadillacs' involvement that she had met with Ms. Steele, the State Department official?
Again, I can't respond to that question. It's outside my jurisdiction.
Okay. The Carter Page FISA warrant was re-upped 3 times. The last time it was re-upped was under your watch. So were you in the approval process of that last time that the Carter Page warrant was?
Well, I can't speak specifically about that warrant, but if you ask, was I in the approval chain, the answer is no.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Mr. Castro. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Special Counsel Mueller, for your testimony and for your service to our country. Donald Trump over the years has surrounded himself with some very shady people. People that lied for him, people that covered up for him, people that helped him enrich himself.
Entonces este es el hermano gemelo. Ah, el hermano gemelo, nada que ver, pues, ¿verdad? El otro no. ¿Cierto?
Specifically, let's turn to the Trump Tower Moscow project, which you described in your report as a quote, highly lucrative deal for the Trump organization. Is that right?
Son dos gemelos, los dos participan en el partido, bueno, los dos nombres empiezan con J, perdón, me confundí.
Sure, it's on volume 2, page 135. It's described as highly lucrative.
Okay, I have it.
Sure.
I have it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Your office prosecuted Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen was Donald Trump's lawyer, for lying to this committee about several aspects of the Trump organization's pursuit of the Trump Tower Moscow deal. Is that right?
That's correct.
According to your report, Cohen lied to, quote, minimize links between the project and Trump, unquote, and to, quote, stick to the party line, unquote, in order not to contradict Trump's public message that no connection existed between Trump and Russia. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, when you're talking about the party line here, the party line in this case...
If I can interject, the one thing I should have said at the outset, if it was in the report, and consequently, I do believe it to be true.
Thank you. The party line in this case was that the deal ended in January 2016. In other words, they were saying that the deal ended in January 2016 before the Republican primaries. In truth, though, the deal extended to June 2016, when Donald Trump was already the presumptive Republican nominee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The party line was also that Cohen discussed the deal with Trump only 3 times, when in truth, they discussed it multiple times. Is that right?
Also true, and part of the basis for the plea that he entered for lying to this entity.
Thank you, and thank you for prosecuting that. The party line was also that Cohen and Trump never discussed traveling to Russia during the campaign, when in truth, they did discuss it. Is that right?
That's accurate.
And the party line was that Cohen never received a response from the Kremlin to his inquiries about the Trump Tower Moscow deal. In fact, Cohen not only received a response from the Kremlin to his email, but also had a lengthy conversation with a Kremlin representative who had a detailed understanding of the project. Is that right?
If it's in the report, that is accurate. Recitation of that piece of the report.
So you have the candidate Trump at the time saying he had no business dealings with Russia, his lawyer who was lying about it, and then the Kremlin who during that time was talking to President Trump's lawyer about the deal. Is that right?
I can't adopt your characterization.
Not only was Cohen lying on Trump's behalf, but so was the Kremlin. On August 30th, 2017, 2 days after Cohen submitted his false statement to this committee, claiming that he never received a response to his email to the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin's press secretary told reporters that the Kremlin left the email unanswered. That statement by Putin's press secretary was false, wasn't it?
I can't speak to that.
Although it was widely reported in the press.
Again, I can't speak to that, particularly if it was dependent upon media sources.
But it was consistent with the lie that Cohen had made to the committee. Is that right?
I'm not certain I could go that far.
So Cohen, President Trump, and the Kremlin were all telling the same lie.
I defer to you on that. I can't get into the details.
Special Counsel Mueller, I want to ask you something that's very important to the nation. Did your investigation evaluate whether President Trump could be vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians because the Kremlin knew that Trump and his associates lied about connections to Russia related to the Trump Tower deal?
I can't speak to that.
I yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Mueller, you've been asked many times this afternoon about collusion, obstruction of justice, and impeachment in the Steele dossier, and I don't think your answers are going to change if I ask you about those questions. So I'm going to ask about a couple of press stories, because a lot of what the American people have received about this have been on press stories, and some of that has been wrong, and some of those press stories have been accurate. On April 13th, 2018, McClatchy reported that you had evidence Michael Cohen made a secret trip to Prague during the 2016 presidential election. I think he told one of the committees here in Congress that was incorrect. Is that story true?
I can't go into it.
Got you. On October 31st, 2016, Slate published a report suggesting that a server at Trump Tower was secretly communicating with Russia's Alpha Bank, and I quote, akin to what criminal syndicates do. Do you know if that story is true?
Do not. Do not.
You do not?
Know whether it's true.
So did you not investigate these allegations which are suggestive of potential Trump-Russia?
Because I believe it's not true doesn't mean it would not be investigated. It may well have been investigated, although my belief at this point is not true.
Good copy. Thank you. As a former CIA officer, I want to focus on something I think both sides of the political aisle can agree on. That is, how do we prevent Russian intelligence and other adversaries from doing this again? And after overseeing counterintelligence operations for 12 years as FBI director, and then investigating what the Russians have done in the 2016 election, you've seen tactics, techniques, and results of Russian intelligence operations. Our committee made a recommendation that the FBI should improve its victim notification process when a person, entity, or campaign has fallen victim to active measures of attack. Would you agree with this?
It sounds like a worthwhile endeavor. I will tell you, though, that the ability of our intelligence agencies to work together in this arena is perhaps more important than that. And adopting whatever, and I'm not that familiar with legislation, but whatever legislation will encourage us working together. By us, I mean the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the rest. It should be pursued aggressively, early.
Who do you think should be responsible within the federal government to counter disinformation?
I'm no longer in the federal government, so
But you've had a long career, storied career, and I don't think there's anybody who better understands the threat that we are facing than you. Do you have an opinion as a former FBI officer?
As to?
As to who should be the coordinating points within the federal government on how to deal with disinformation?
I don't want to wade in those waters.
A good copy. One of the most striking things in your report is that the Internet Research Agency not only undertook a social media campaign in the U.S., but they were able to organize political rallies after the election. Our committee issued a report and insight on saying that Russian active measures are growing with frequency and intensity, and including their expanded use of groups such as the IRA, and these groups pose a significant threat to the United States and our allies in upcoming elections. Would you agree with that?
Yes. In fact, one of the other areas that we have to look at are many more companies, or not companies, many more countries are developing capability to replicate what the Russians had done.
You alluded to making sure all the elements of the federal government should be working together. Do you have a suggestion on a strategy to do that to counter this disinformation?
Not overarching it.
Is this, in your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
Así nomás.
Director Mueller, I appreciate
Le preguntó si creía que iba a ser con un solo intento. Oye, creía que iba a hacer pasar de nuevo. No fue solamente, está pasando ahora.
Muy
bien. Y que esperaba que pasara la próxima elección también.
Director Mueller, I'd like to go to the motives behind the Trump campaign, encouragement and acceptance of help during the election. Obviously, a clear motivation was to help them in what would turn out to be a very close election, but there was another key motivation, and that was, frankly, the desire to make money. I always try to remember what my dad, who never had the opportunity to go beyond the 8th grade, taught me, which is that I should never, ever underestimate the capacity of some people to cut corners and even more in order to worship and chase the almighty buck. And this is important because I think it, in fact, does go to the heart of why the Trump campaign was so unrelentingly intent on developing relationships with the Kremlin. So let's quickly revisit one financial scheme we just discussed, which was the Trump Tower in Moscow. We indicated earlier that it was a lucrative deal. Trump, in fact, stood, he and his company, to earn many millions of dollars on that deal, did they not, sir?
True.
And Cohen, Mr. Cohen, his attorney, testified before this committee that President Trump believed the deal required Kremlin approval. Is that consistent with what he told you?
I'm not certain whether it's Mr. Trump himself or others associated with that enterprise that had discussed the necessity of having the input from the state, meaning the Russian government, in order for it to go forward successfully.
Isn't it also true that Donald Trump viewed his presidential campaign, as he told top campaign aides, that the campaign was an infomercial for the Trump organization and his properties?
I'm not familiar with that.
Then let's turn to Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. Did, in fact, your investigation find any evidence that Manafort intended to use his position as Trump's campaign chair for his own personal financial benefit?
I will say there was some indication of that, but I won't go further.
I think you'll find it on page 135 of Volume 1. During the transition, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with Sergei Gorkov, the head of a Russian-owned bank that is under U.S. sanctions. And according to the head of the bank, he met with Kushner in his capacity as CEO of Kushner Companies to discuss business opportunities. Is that correct, sir?
I'm not certain.
I'm not
certain about that. Let me just put it that way.
It was asserted thusly in your report, Volume 1, 160, pages 161 and 162. Your report notes that at the time, Kushner Companies were trying to renegotiate $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion lease of their flagship building at 666 Fifth Avenue, correct?
I'm not familiar with those financial arrangements.
Also on page 162, where Kushner Companies, it was asserted, had debt obligations coming due on the company. Eric Prince, a supporter close to Trump,
a supporter,
campaign and administrative.
A supporter. I was.
Yes, he met in the Seychelles during the transition with Kirill Dmitriev, who was the head of a sanctioned Russian government investment arm, which had close ties to Vladimir Putin. Correct, sir?
Yes.
Your investigation determined that Mr. Prince had not known nor conducted business with Dmitriev before Trump won the election. Correct?
Well, I defer to the report on that.
Yet it does, and yet Prince, who had connections to top administration, Trump administration officials, met with Dmitriev during the transition period to discuss business opportunities, among other things. But it wasn't just Trump and his associates who were trying to make money off this deal, nor hide it, nor lie about it. Russia was too. That was the whole point, to gain relief from sanctions, which would hugely benefit their incredibly wealthy oligarchs. For example, sanctions relief was discussed at that June 9th meeting in the Trump Tower, was it not, sir?
Yes, but it was not a main subject for discussion.
Trump administration National Security Advisor designate Michael Flynn also discussed sanctions in a secret conversation with the Russian ambassador, did he not?
Correct.
So to summarize, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, Eric Prince, and others in the Trump orbit all tried to use their connections with the Trump organization to profit from Russia, which was openly seeking relief from sanctions. Is that true, sir?
I'm not certain I can adopt what you
Well, I will, and I'd further assert that was not only dangerous, it was un-American. Greed corrupts. Greed corrupts, and it is a terrible foundation for developing American foreign policy.
Mr. Ratcliffe. Director Mueller, given your constraints on what you're able or allowed to answer with respect to counterintelligence matters or other matters that are currently open and under investigation, you're not going to be able to answer my remaining questions. So I thank you for your courtesies in the answers that you have given to my prior questions. And I do thank you for your extraordinary career and record of service, and yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe and Mr. Mueller. Let me associate my words with Mr. Ratcliffe. Got a few more questions. I want to clean up a little bit about the Eric Prince Seychelles meeting. So Eric Prince testified before this committee that he was surveilled by the U.S. government, and the information from this surveillance was leaked to the press. Did you investigate whether Prince was surveilled and whether classified information on him was illegally leaked to the media?
Did you say, did you or will you?
Well, I know you can't. I know you're not.
So I can't discuss
I know you're
either
not going to join back up in the ranks. But did you refer? Were you aware that Prince has made these allegations that he was surveilled? He's concerned that there were leaks about this surveillance. Did you make any referrals about these leaks?
I can't get into discussion on it.
Okay. Also want to, General Flynn, I know you came after the leak of his phone call with the Russian ambassador. Your time at FBI, it would be a major scandal, wouldn't it, for the leak of the National Security Advisor and anyone.
I can't adopt that hypothesis.
Did your report name any people who were acting as U.S. government informants or sources without disclosing that fact?
I can't answer that.
On volume 1, page 133 of your report, you state that Konstantin Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. His name came up quite often today, but your report omits to mention that Kilimnik has long-term relationships with U.S. government officials, including our own State Department.
I can't get into that.
I know it's not in the report, but if Kilimnik is being used in the report to say that he was possibly some type of Russian agent, and I think it is important for this committee to know if Kilimnik has ties to our own State Department, which it appears that he does.
Again, it's the same territory that I'm loath to get into.
You were asked this earlier about Trump attorney John Dowd, that pieces of his phone call were omitted from the report. It was what Mr. Dowd calls exculpatory evidence. Are you concerned about?
I'm not certain I would agree with that characterization. I think I said that before.
Yes. An American citizen from the Republic of Georgia, who your report misidentifies as a Russian, claims that your report omitted parts of a text message he had with Michael Cohen about stopping the flow of compromising tapes of Donald Trump. In the omitted portions, he says he did not know what the tapes actually showed. Was that portion of the exchange left out of the report for a reason?
No, we got an awful lot into the report, but we did not get every intersection or conversation and the like. So I am not familiar with that particular episode you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Welch. Director Mueller, did you find there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Well, we don't use the word collusion. The word we usually use is well, not collusion, but one of the other terms that that fills in when collusion is not used. In any event, we decided not to use the word collusion inasmuch as it has no relevance to the criminal law arena.
The term is conspiracy that you prefer to use?
That's a conspiracy, exactly right.
You help me, I'll help you.
Thank you.
There's an agreement. Thank you. And in fact, you had to then make a charging decision after your investigation, where unless there was enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, you wouldn't make a charge, correct?
Generally, that's the case.
But making that decision does not mean your investigation failed to turn up evidence of conspiracy.
Absolutely correct.
And in fact, I'll go through some of the significant findings that your exhaustive investigation made. You found, as I understand it, that from May 2016 until the end of the campaign chairman, Mr. Manafort, gave private polling information to Russian agents, correct?
Correct.
Could you speak in the microphone?
Yeah, I will. My apologies.
Thank you. And your investigation found that in June 2016, Donald Trump Jr. made an arrangement to meet at Trump Tower along with Jared Kushner and others, expecting to receive dirt on the Hillary Clinton campaign, correct?
Correct.
And you found in your investigation that on July 27th, candidate Trump called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email, something that for the first time they did about 5 hours later, correct?
That's correct.
And you also found that on August 2nd, Mr. Manafort met with a person tied to Russian intelligence, Mr. Kalimnik, and gave him internal campaign strategy, aware that Russia was intending to do a misinformation social media campaign, correct?
I'm not certain of the tie there.
But the fact of that meeting, you
But
agree
the
with?
fact of the meeting took place is accurate.
In your investigation, as I understand it, also found that in late summer of 2016, the Trump campaign, in fact, devised its strategy and messaging around WikiLeaks releases of materials that were stolen from the Democratic National Committee, correct?
Is that from the report?
Yes. It's according to Mr. Gates.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And you also talked earlier about the finding in your investigation that in September and October of 2016, Donald Trump Jr. had email communications with WikiLeaks, now indicted, about releasing information damaging to the Clinton campaign, correct?
True.
So,
True.
All right. So I understand you made a decision, prosecutorial decision, that this would not rise to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I ask if you share my concern. And my concern is, have we established a new normal from this past campaign that is going to apply to future campaigns so that if any one of us running for the U.S. House, any candidate for the U.S. Senate, any candidate for the presidency of the United States, aware that if a hostile foreign power is trying to influence an election, has no duty to report that to the FBI or other authorities?
Well, I hope.
Go ahead.
I hope this is not the new normal, but I fear it is.
And would, in fact, have the ability, without fear of legal repercussion, to meet with agents of that foreign entity hostile to the American election?
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Is that an apprehension that you share with me?
Yes.
And that there would be no repercussions whatsoever to Russia if they did this again. And as you stated earlier, as we sit here, they're doing it now. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right.
Do you have any advice to this Congress as together what we should do to protect our electoral system and accept responsibility on our part to report to you or your successor when we're aware of hostile foreign engagement in our elections?
I would say the basis, the first line of defense really is the ability of the various agencies who have some piece of this to not only share information, but share expertise, share targets, and use the full resources that we have to address this problem.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I yield back.
Mr. Maloney.
The new normal.
Cuático. Fuerte momento.
Mr. Mueller, thank you. I know it's been a long day, and I want to make clear
Fuerzas
how much
extranjeras
respect I
interviniendo en las
have for your
elecciones
service
norteamericanas
and
y
for
nadie
your
reportando al
extraordinary career.
respecto.
And I want you to
Nuevo normal.
understand my questions in that context, sir. I'm going to be asking you about Appendix C. To to your report, and in particular, the decision not to do a sworn interview of the president. It's really the only subject I want to talk to you about, sir. Why didn't you subpoena the president?
Well, at the outset, after we took over and initiated the investigation.
If I could ask you to speak on the microphone.
Yeah, of course. At the outset, after we took over the investigation and began it and pursued it, quite obviously one of the things we anticipated wanting to accomplish, that is having the interview of the president. We negotiated with him for a little over a year, and I think what you adverted to in the appendix lays out our expectations as a result of those negotiations. But finally, when we were almost towards the end of our investigation and we'd had little success in pushing to get the interview of the president, we decided that we did not want to exercise the subpoena powers because of the necessity of expediting the end of the investigation.
Was that, excuse me, did you want
I was going to say, the expectation was if we did subpoena the president, he would fight the subpoena and we would be in the midst of the investigation for a substantial period of time.
Right, but as we sit here, you've never had an opportunity to ask the president in-person questions under oath, and so obviously that must have been a difficult decision. And you're right, Appendix C lays that out, and indeed, I believe you described the in-person interview as vital. That's your word. And of course, you make clear you had the authority and the legal justification to do it. As you point out, you waited a year. You put up with a lot of negotiations. You made numerous accommodations, which you lay out so that he could prepare and not be surprised. I take it you were trying to be fair to the president. And by the way, you were going to limit the questions when you got to written questions to Russia only. And in fact, you did go with written questions after about 9 months, sir, right? And the president responded to those, and you have some hard language for what you thought of those responses. What did you think of the president's written responses, Mr. Mueller?
It's certainly not as useful as the interview would be.
In fact, you pointed out, and by my count, there were more than 30 times when the president said he didn't recall, he didn't remember, no independent recollection, no current recollection, and I take it by your answer that it wasn't as helpful. That's why you used words like incomplete.
Puta la wea.
Chispa puta la wea.
Demasiado rato andando solo esta porquería. Ahora vuelven segundos. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Te saltaste el 6. ¿Tú no sabes contar hasta...?
No.
Esa es la diferencia entre la gente de la Chile, ingeniería de la Chile, ingeniería católica. Porque nosotros
One is
sabemos
that
contar
somebody
hasta
told you you couldn't do it, but nobody told you you couldn't subpoena the president. Is that right?
No, we understood we could subpoena the president.
Rosenstein didn't tell you, Whitaker didn't tell you, Barr didn't tell you you couldn't.
We could serve a subpoena.
So the only other explanation, well, there's two others, I guess. One, that you just flinched, that you had the opportunity to do it and you didn't do it. But sir, you don't strike me as the kind of guy who flinches.
I hope not.
Well, then the third explanation, I hope not too, sir. And the third explanation I can think of is that you didn't think you needed it. And in fact, what caught my eye was page 13 on volume 2, where you said, in fact, you had a substantial body of evidence. And you cite a bunch of cases there, don't you, about how you often have to prove intent to obstruct justice without an in-person interview. That's the kind of nature of it. And you use terms like a substantial body of evidence, significant evidence of the president's intent. So my question, sir, is did you have sufficient evidence of the president's intent to obstruct justice, and is that why you didn't do the interview?
There's a balance. In other words, how much evidence you have to satisfy the last element against how much time are you willing to spend in the courts litigating the interview with the president.
And in this case, you felt that you had enough evidence of the president's intent.
We had to make a balanced decision in terms of how much evidence we had compared to the length of time it would take
and
to
sir,
do
because
that.
I have limited time, you thought that if you gave it to the Attorney General or to this Congress, that there was sufficient evidence that it was better than that delay.
Can you state that again?
Well, that it was better than the delay to present the sufficient evidence, your term, of the president's intent to obstruct justice to the Attorney General and to this committee. Isn't that why you didn't do the interview?
No, the reason we didn't do the interview is because of the length of time that it would take to resolve the issues attendant to that.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and Director Mueller, thank you so much for being a person of honor and integrity. Thank you for your service to the nation. We are certainly better for it. Director Mueller, I too want to focus on the written responses that the President did provide and the continued efforts to lie and cover up what happened during the 2016 election. Were the President's answers submitted under oath?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, they were. Were these all the answers your office wanted to ask the President about Russia interference in the 2016 election?
No, not necessarily.
So there were other
Yes.
questions that you wanted to answer. Did you analyze his written answers on Russia interference to draw conclusions about the President's credibility?
No, it was perhaps one of the factors, but nothing more than that.
It was one of the factors. So what did you determine about the President's credibility?
And that I can't get into.
Director Mueller, I know based on your decades of experience, you probably had an opportunity to analyze the credibility of countless witnesses, but you weren't able to do so with this witness.
Well, with every witness, particularly a leading witness, one assesses the credibility day by day, witness by witness, document by document. And that's what happened in this case. So we started with very little, and by the end, we ended up with a fair amount. Yeah, fair amount.
Thank you. Well, let's go through some of the answers to take a closer look at his credibility, because it seems to me, Director Mueller, that his answers were not credible at all. Do some of President Trump's incomplete answers relate to Trump Tower Moscow?
Yes.
For example, did you ask the President whether he had at any time directed or suggested that discussions about Trump Moscow project should cease?
Should what?
Cease.
Do you have a citation?
Yes, we're still in Appendix C, Section 1-7.
The first page?
Uh-huh. Says the President did not answer whether he had at any time directed or suggested that discussions about the Trump-Moscow project should cease, but he has since made public comments about this topic.
Okay. And the question was?
Did the President, let me go on to the next question. Did the President fully answer that question in his written statement to you about the Trump-Moscow project ceasing? Again, in Appendix C.
And can you direct me to the particular paragraph you're adverting to?
It would be Appendix C-C1, but let me move forward. 9 days after he submitted his written answers, didn't the President say publicly that he, quote, decided not to do the project, unquote? And that is in your report.
I'd ask you if you would to point out the particular paragraph that you're focused on.
We can move on. Did the President answer your follow-up
Hay
questions?
cobertura en político con respecto a
According
ciertas
to the report,
versiones
there
de
were
que
follow-up questions because
Mueller
of the
está como
President's
teniendo muchas
incomplete answers
dificultades
about the Moscow project.
enfrentar
Did
este
the
tipo de cosas.
President
Y de hecho,
answer
esa
your
era la razón
follow-up
por la cual
questions
era
either
muy
in
reacio
writing or orally?
a
And we're now in volume
aceptar esta
2, page
invitación
150 through 151.
a venir a declarar, porque al
He
parecer
did
no,
not.
al
In
menos según
fact,
algunas
there were
personas
many
cercanas a
questions that
él,
you asked the
él no
President
está
that
en
he simply
condiciones de hacer
didn't
esto.
answer. Isn't that correct?
True.
And there were many answers that contradicted other evidence you had gathered during the investigation. Isn't that correct,
Yes.
Director Mueller?
Ahora se acordó.
Sí.
Está on fire.
Director Mueller, for
On a
example, the President in his written answer stated he did not recall having advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks releases. Is that correct?
I think that's what he said.
But didn't your investigation uncover evidence that the President did, in fact, have advanced knowledge of WikiLeaks public releases of emails damaging to his opponent?
And I can't get into that area.
Did your investigation determine, after very careful vetting of Rick Gates and Michael Cohen's, that you found them to be credible?
We found the President to be credible?
That you found Gates and Cohen to be credible in their statements about WikiLeaks?
Those areas I'm not going to discuss.
Okay. Could you say, Director Mueller, that the President was credible?
I can't answer that question.
Director Mueller, isn't it fair to say that the President's written answers were not only inadequate and incomplete because he didn't answer many of your questions, but where he did, his answers showed that he wasn't always being truthful?
I would say, generally,
generally. Director Mueller, it's one thing for the president to lie to the American people about your investigation, falsely claiming that you found no collusion and no obstruction, but it's something else altogether for him to get away with not answering your questions and lying about them. And as a former law enforcement officer of almost 30 years, I find that a disgrace to our criminal justice system. Thank you so much. I yield back to the chairman.
Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Director Mueller, thank you for your devoted service to your country. Earlier today, you described your report as detailing a criminal investigation, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Director, since it was outside the purview of your investigation, your report did not reach counterintelligence conclusions regarding the subject matter of your report.
That's true.
For instance, since it was outside your purview, your report did not reach counterintelligence conclusions regarding any Trump administration officials who might potentially be vulnerable to compromise or blackmail by Russia, correct?
Those decisions probably were made in the FBI.
But not in your report, correct?
Not in our report. We advert to the counterintelligence goals of our investigation, which were secondary to any criminal wrongdoing that we could find.
Let's talk about one administration official in particular, namely President Donald Trump. Other than Trump Tower Moscow, your report does not address or detail the president's financial ties or dealings with Russia, correct?
Correct.
Similarly, since it was outside your purview, your report does not address the question of whether Russian oligarchs engaged in money laundering through any of the president's businesses, correct?
Correct.
And of course, your office did not obtain the president's tax returns, which could otherwise show foreign financial sources, correct?
Not to speak to that. I'm not going to speak to that.
In July 2017, the president said his personal finances were off limits or outside the purview of your investigation, and he drew a quote-unquote red line around his personal finances. Were the president's personal finances outside the purview of your investigation?
I'm not going to get into that.
Were you instructed by anyone not to investigate the president's personal finances?
No.
Mr. Mueller, I'd like to turn your attention to counterintelligence
Acaban de decir
risks
que murió Rutger
associated
Hauer,
with lying.
uno de los protagonistas de
Individuals can be subject to blackmail
Blade
if they
Runner.
lie about their interactions with foreign
75
countries,
años,
correct?
viejito.
True.
For example,
Hizo
you
una película
successfully
con
charged
Manuela
former
Martelli hace
National
unos
Security
par de años.
Advisor Michael Flynn of lying to federal agents about his conversations with Russian officials, correct?
Correct.
Since it was outside the purview of your investigation, your report did not address how Flynn's false statements could pose a national security risk because the Russians knew the falsity of those statements, right?
I cannot get into that mainly because there are many elements of the FBI that are looking at different aspects of that issue.
Currently.
Currently.
Thank you. As you noted in Volume 2 of your report, Donald Trump repeated 5 times in one press conference, Mr. Mueller, in 2016, quote, "I have nothing to do with Russia." Of course, Michael Cohen said Donald Trump was not being truthful because at this time, Trump was attempting to build Trump Tower Moscow. Your report does not address whether Donald Trump was compromised in any way because of any potential false statements that he made about Trump Tower Moscow, correct?
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Director Mueller, I want to turn your attention to a couple other issues. You served as FBI director during 3 presidential elections, correct?
Yes.
And during those 3 presidential elections, you have never initiated an investigation at the FBI looking into whether a foreign government interfered in our elections the same way you did in this particular instance, correct?
I would say I personally know, but the FBI quite obviously has how do you defend an attack such as the Russians undertook in 2016?
Now, Director Mueller, Is there any information you'd like to share with this committee that you have not so far today?
Well, that's a broad question. And it'd take me a while to get an answer to it, but I'll say no.
Mr. Mueller, you said that every American should pay very close attention to the systematic and sweeping fashion in which the Russians interfered in our democracy. Are you concerned that we are not doing enough currently to prevent this from happening again?
Generally, and what I said in my opening statement this morning, and here that no, much more needs to be done in order to protect against this.
Si está haciendo suficiente para proteger las elecciones. No, no está haciendo suficiente.
Thank you, Director.
We have two 5-minute periods remaining. Mr. Nunes and myself. Mr. Nunes, you are recognized.
Mr. Mueller, it's been a long
Ahora en los
day for you,
cierres.
and you've had a long,
Ha sido un día
great
largo para el
career.
señor Mueller y
I wanna
para el
thank
señor
you
Veloso y
for
Operación
your
Mimisa.
long-time service, starting in Vietnam, obviously in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Justice, and the FBI.
Solo recordar que
And I wanna
David
thank
Nunes
you
antes
for
era el
doing something you didn't have to do. You
líder
came
de
here
esta
upon your own
comisión
free
antes
will.
de que los demócratas
And we
ganaran la
appreciate
elección
your
de
time
midterm.
today. With that, I yield
Y
back.
como líder de
Thank you,
esta comisión, él obtenía esta información
Mueller, I want to,
a partir de la investigación que ya Mueller
close out my
y
questions.
con esa información corría,
Turn to some of the
literalmente,
exchange
corría
I had with Mr.
corriendo
Welch
a la
a
Casa
bit
Blanca para
earlier.
entregársela a
I'd like to
Trump,
see if
cosa
we
que Trump
can
pudiera trabajar
broaden the
mejor su
aperture at
defensa.
the end of the
Pero comía
hearing.
harto porque parece que no bajó mucho de peso a
Sí.
pesar de
Your
la...
testimony
A pesar de
today,
mucho que
I
corría.
gather that you
Es un
believe
weón
that
bien miserable y que
knowingly
fue parte
accepting
de la construcción y
foreign
estructura
assistance during a presidential campaign is an unethical thing
de
to
obstrucción
do,
a la justicia.
And a crime.
and a crime.
Circumstances, yes.
And to the
And a
degree,
crime given certain circumstances.
and to the degree that it undermines our democracy and our institutions, we can agree that it's also unpatriotic
True.
and wrong.
True.
The standard of behavior for a presidential candidate, or any candidate for that matter, shouldn't be merely whether something is criminal. There should be held to a higher standard. You would agree?
Yeah, I will not get into that because it goes to the standards to be applied by other institutions besides ours.
Well, I'm just referring to ethical standards. We should hold our elected officials to a standard higher than mere avoidance of criminality, shouldn't we?
Absolutely.
You have served this country for decades. You've taken an oath to defend the Constitution. You hold yourself to a standard of doing what's right.
I would hope.
You have. I think we can all see that. And befitting the times, I'm sure your reward will be unending criticism. But we are grateful. The need to act in an ethical manner is not just a moral one, but when people act unethically, it also exposes them to compromise, particularly in dealing with foreign powers. Is that true?
True.
Because when someone acts unethically in connection with a foreign partner, that foreign partner can later expose their wrongdoing and extort them.
True.
And that conduct, that unethical conduct, can be of a financial nature if you have a financial motive or an illicit business dealing. Am I right?
Yes.
But it can also just involve deception. If you are lying about something that can be exposed, then you can be blackmailed.
Also true.
In the case of Michael Flynn, he was secretly doing business with Turkey, correct?
Yes.
And that could open him up to compromise that financial relationship.
I presume.
He also lied about his discussions with the Russian ambassador. And since the Russians were on the other side of the conversation, they could have exposed that, could they not?
Yes.
If a presidential candidate was doing business in Russia and saying he wasn't, Russians could expose that too, could they not?
I leave that to you.
Well, let's look at Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, someone that the Trump organization was in contact with to make that deal happen. Your report indicates that Michael Cohen had a long conversation on the phone with someone from Dmitry Peskov's office. Presumably the Russians could record that conversation, could they not?
Yes.
And so if candidate Trump was saying, I have no dealings with the Russians, but the Russians had a tape recording, they could expose that, could they not?
Yes.
That's the stuff of counterintelligence nightmares, is it not?
Well, it has to do with counterintelligence and the need for a strong counterintelligence entity.
It does indeed.
Oh, qué potente.
And when this was revealed that
Qué bueno este gallo.
there were these communications, notwithstanding the president's denials, the president was confronted about this, and he said two things. First of all, that's not a crime. But I think you and I have already agreed that that shouldn't be the standard, right, Mr. Mueller?
True.
And the second thing he said was, why should I miss out on all those opportunities? I mean, why indeed? Merely running a presidential campaign, why should you miss out on making all that money? Was the import of his statement. Were you ever able to ascertain whether Donald Trump still intends to build that tower when he leaves office?
Is that a question, sir?
Yes, were you able to ascertain, because he wouldn't answer your questions completely, whether or if he ever ended that desire to build that tower?
I'm not going to speculate on that.
If the president was concerned that if he lost his election, he didn't want to miss out on that money, might he have the same concern about losing his re-election and missing out on that money?
Speculation.
The difficulty with this, of course, is we are all left to wonder whether the president is representing us or his financial interests. That concludes my questions. Mr. Nunes, do you have any concluding remarks? Director Mueller, let me close by returning to where I began. Thank you for your service, and thank you for leading this investigation. The facts you set out in your report and have elucidated here today tell a disturbing tale of a massive Russian intervention in our election, of a campaign so eager to win, so driven by greed that it was willing to accept the help of a hostile foreign power in a presidential election decided by a handful of votes in a few key states. Your work tells of a campaign so determined to conceal their corrupt use of foreign help that they risk going to jail by lying to you, to the FBI, and to Congress about it, and indeed, some have gone to jail over such lies. And your work speaks of a president who committed countless acts of obstruction of justice that, in my opinion, and that of many other prosecutors, had it been anyone else in the country, they would have been indicted. Notwithstanding the many things you have addressed today and in your report, there were some questions you could not answer given the constraints you're operating under. You would not tell us whether you would have indicted the president but for the OLC opinion that you could not. And so the Justice Department will have to make that decision when the president leaves office, both as to the crime of obstruction of justice and as to the campaign finance fraud scheme that individual one directed and coordinated and for which Michael Cohen went to jail. You would not tell us whether the president should be impeached, nor did we ask you, since it is our responsibility to determine the proper remedy for the conduct outlined in your report. Whether we decide to impeach the president in the House or we do not, we must take any action necessary to protect the country while he is in office. You would not tell us the results or whether other bodies looked into Russian compromise in the form of money laundering, so we must do so. You would not tell us whether the counterintelligence investigation revealed whether people still serving within the administration pose a risk of compromise and should never have been given a security clearance, so we must find out. We did not bother to ask whether financial inducements from any Gulf nations were influencing U.S. policy, since it is outside the four corners of your report, and so we must find out. But one thing is clear from your report, your testimony, from Director Wray's statements yesterday. The Russians massively intervened in 2016, and they are prepared to do so again in voting that is set to begin a mere 8 months from now. The president seems to welcome the help again, and so we must make all efforts to harden our elections infrastructure, to ensure there is a paper trail for all voting, to deter the Russians from meddling, to discover it when they do, to disrupt it, and to make them pay. Protecting the sanctity of our elections begins, however, with the recognition that accepting foreign help is disloyal to our country, unethical, and wrong. We cannot control what the Russians do, not completely, but we can decide what we do. And that this centuries-old experiment we call American democracy is worth cherishing. Director Mueller, thank you again for being here today. And before I adjourn, I would like to excuse you and Mr. Zebley. Everyone else, please remain seated.
El otro weón que también juró al lado. ¿Juró el otro weón? Sí.
Parece que juró.
Sí. No abrió la boca. Muy curioso. Bueno.
Está viejito, mira como Camila.
Súper viejito, sí. Ya no se puede. Yo creo que le queda poco.
Bueno, yo creo que él... Todo bien.
This hearing is adjourned.
Bueno. Un poco el volumen de esto.
It's a hoax. A hoax. We chant no collusion. No collusion, no obstruction.
Bueno.
No nothing.
Esto fue, yo voy a repetir mis comentarios de mis apreciaciones de la vez pasada. Yo creo que esto fue como el mínimo que se podía esperar. Fue un avance para los demócratas en el hecho que estas conversaciones se hayan tenido. Creo que es importante también para su país, ¿cachai? Para al menos aumentar un poco la presión política de fortalecer un poquito sus protecciones electorales. Hoy día hagan de echar, si no me equivoco, al Juan que se supone que tenía que velar por la integridad de las elecciones ante elecciones extranjeras, porque el orgullo y el ego de Trump hiere ante cualquier posible mención de que su elección no habría sido absolutamente legítima. In the biggest triumph ever. Entonces, eso es importante, pero políticamente, que era lo más relevante acá, fue un avance para los demócratas, pero mucho menor que el que pudo haber sido. Ahora, fue como el mínimo avance que uno podría haber esperado por el solo hecho de haber tenido este gallo declarando ahí.
Sí, y el hecho de que la gente, o sea, incluso con lo lacónico y restrictivo que fue Mueller en el testimonio, el solo hecho de que se citaran párrafos, frases, extractos del reporte en la tele, diciendo Mueller que sí, así es, sí. Me dice dónde está, sí, así es. Porque hay gente que no leyó el reporte.
Claro,
eso ya...
sí, eso es un objetivo.
El fondo creo que quería que se leyera en el fondo el reporte por la tele. Y con Mueller diciendo que era cierto, digamos.
Así que...
y la otra cosa...
¿Para Trump? No. ¿Cuál?
Ese.
No,
este.
No,
¿Ah?
este.
Bueno.
Ya. Ese fue Trump.
Oye, pero interesante que también cambió la frase, interesante, de Adam Schiff, que estuvo súper bien, encuentro yo. Sobre todo al final, cuando cambió de México va a pagar por esto, a los rusos van a pagar por esto. En contextos completamente distintos. En un caso el muro,
está bien.
innecesario muro, pero en este caso los rusos van a pagar.
No van a pagar, pero
en el fondo lo ofrecieron, sí, la mostraron los dientes.
Pero por último está bien poner un poquito más de presión política para que la hueá pase.
Está bien, porque acuérdate que cuando Vladimir Putin echó una cierta cantidad de diplomáticos gringos, Trump dijo que qué bueno, hay menos gente que pagar, digo, menos. ¿Te acuerdas de eso?
Sí. Y eso. ¿Algo más? Yo creo que estamos. Jóvenes, ha sido un placer. Si es que alguien queda viendo hasta ahora, o los que quieran verlo después, me pueden contactar por redes sociales, qué sé yo, y ahí pueden opinar al respecto en la página de Facebook también. Este video segundo no tuvo mucha discusión, el anterior mucho más. Pero bueno, la cosa fue larga y es difícil mantener la atención de todo el mundo. Pero está bien. Esto también fue un experimento. Estamos experimentando con equipos, con cosas y viendo qué se puede hacer. A ver.
Yo de hecho estoy escuchando ahora Privet, mi audífono, lo que significa que un ruso me está saludando por el interno. No sé cómo nos hackeó, pero Privet, Sergei, eso. Ojalá que no te haya también hackeando, porque a mí no me gusta hablar Aquí mi colega acá al lado tampoco.
Bueno, eso es. Así que hasta la próxima.
Hasta la próxima, pequeña luz.